Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? On a fog-choked October morning in 2019, Alex Mercer disappeared from a stretch of highway in northern Pennsylvania that hadn't existed on any map in over 50 years. That stretch, locals used to call it Briar Ridge, was wiped off the state records after the flood of '71, and what was left of it was supposed to be submerged beneath the waters of Lake Edison. The place had been forgotten, on purpose, but Alex wasn't a local. He was a documentary filmmaker chasing a story, and like most who came poking around Briar Ridge, he found something. Only, he didn't live long enough to show the world what it was. His last known communication was a shaky voicemail to his producer that sounded like it had been recorded from the bottom of a well. His voice was ragged with panic. "Something's wrong here," he said. "The houses, they're too quiet. There's light, but no power lines. I saw a girl. No, she saw me. Her eyes." The message cut off with a burst of static and something else. A whisper. You'd miss it if you weren't listening for it. That voicemail never went public. It was locked behind a police investigation that led nowhere and a family that stopped asking questions after they received a thick envelope of unmarked bills and a one-sentence note let him rest. But 5 years later, in a decaying apartment in Queens, a freelance journalist named Tasha Lorne stumbled onto Alex's forgotten hard drive. She wasn't looking for it. She had been hired to clean out his cousin's place after an overdose. And the drive had been ducked, taped to the underside of a false drawer in a kitchen cabinet. What was on that drive would never leave her the same. The footage begins like any other road documentary dashboard cam. Lo-fi music humming from the radio, Alex narrating in his easy, conversational tone. So, apparently there's this whole town, Briar Ridge, that was abandoned in the early 70s after a government flood control project. Except, here's the thing, it never flooded. The dam was built, the lake filled, but Briar Ridge, it didn't drown. Or maybe it did. And what came back up wasn't really a town at all. That's what I'm gonna find out. He chuckles. Let's see what the dead are up to. The camera flicks to drone footage, rolling hills, mist rising like breath from the treetops, and in the far distance, nestled where no road should be, a cluster of rooftops, not ruins, actual rooftops, clean, neat, untouched. And this is where things stop feeling like a documentary. Tasha's voiceover breaks in. I've checked federal maps from 1970 onward. Nothing exists where this footage was taken. The coordinates lead to a sheer drop off into Lake Edison. But what Alex filmed, what he walked into, it's dry and inhabited. Back to Alex. His camcorder jerks as he parks on an overgrown gravel path flanked by rotting wooden fences. Something skitters across the camera's field, too fast to see clearly. He doesn't notice. Not yet, he walks. And this is the part people remember. Not the static, not the trees that seem to lean in, not even the houses, each one pristine and whitewashed, with flickering porch lights powered by nothing visible. It's the silence, not the natural kind. Not the hush of leaves or the absence of birdsong. This was a silence that felt designed, a hush too perfect, too absolute, as if the world was holding its breath. Then he sees her, a girl, maybe 12, pale, wearing a red dress that doesn't move in the wind. She's standing at the end of the road, half in shadow, her hair covering most of her face. Alex calls out friendly. She doesn't move. He takes a step forward, and she tilts her head, not like a child, but like something pretending to be one. Studying, measuring, the footage skips. A hard, jarring jump like a scratched DVD. Suddenly, he's at the center of the town. The girl is gone. No people, no cars. But every door stands open, and inside each house, they're all lived in. Clocks tick. Fires burn in hearths. Dinner plates sit on long, cold meals. One house has a freshly run bath, steam still rising. Yet there's no one. Alex's breathing gets louder, faster. This isn't abandoned. Someone's here. Or they were. Just now. He opens a door. Inside is a hallway lined with framed photographs. Only the faces have been scratched out. Deep gouges, as if by fingernails. From the kitchen, a voice. Clear. Crisp. You shouldn't be here. He whirls, and the camera catches a glimpse of someone standing at the far end of the hall. Not the girl. Something taller, in black, faceless. It takes a step toward him, and the footage corrupts. Tasha pauses the video. This section of the drive was heavily damaged. It took weeks to recover even partial files. But what we could recover changes everything. The next segment has no video, only audio. Alex whispering. Panicked, I hid in a cellar. I don't know where the way out is. Every road loops. Every door opens into the same house. The people, I see them. Only, they're not right. They're stuck. On repeat, like ghosts in a loop, but aware of it. Then, softer one of them spoke to me. Said I called it up. That by looking for the town, I brought it back. A scream cuts him off, not his. A man's voice, wet, gurgling, pleading. Then laughter, from multiple mouths, unnatural. And then a new voice, clear, calm, female. We were waiting for someone to look again. Now that you've seen us, we can leave. The footage ends with a low, continuous hum. Tasha's final message on the recovered drive is shaky. I didn't want to believe it. Thought it was an elaborate hoax. But 2 days ago, I took a drive. I followed Alex's GPS trail. She holds up her phone. There's a road now. Wasn't before. And this morning, I checked again. Google Maps calls it Briar Ridge Road. The screen goes black. And then a single frame, if you pause at the right moment, shows Tasha's apartment. Empty. And at the far end, in the mirror above her mantel, a girl in a red dress, smiling. Authorities never confirmed Alex's death. His body was never found. The footage, which had been posted anonymously to a conspiracy forum, vanished within hours. All download links dead. Hard drive destroyed. Forum shut down. Tasha Lorne was reported missing in March 2024. Her apartment was sealed, and her case labeled as unexplained disappearance. But here's the part that gets under your skin. Briar Ridge Road now shows up on satellite imagery. A neat little turn off near Route 219. Trees line both sides. There's a gas station near the bend that wasn't there last year. A diner. A motel. People live there now. At least, they look like people. But if you drive by, if you're foolish enough to stop, you might notice something strange. The lights stay on all night. The same song plays from every radio. The clocks in every window are set to 3:17 a.m. And if you look close, too close, you might see her. The girl in the red dress, watching. Waiting. Because she knows you've started to look. And that's how it begins. It had been 3 weeks since Tasha's disappearance. 3 weeks since her name showed up on the back page of a fading newspaper, buried between a missing dog and a high school fundraiser. Her parents never went to the press. Her landlord changed the locks within days. And the story, the real story, was already being forgotten, except by one man, Jonah Tell. Jonah wasn't a friend of Tasha's. They had met once, briefly, at a journalism workshop in Boston, but her name stuck. Something about her questions that day, the way she dug at topics others skirted around, had left an impression. So when her name resurfaced in a missing persons notice on a conspiracy blog he frequented for amusement, something in him shifted. The post had one line beneath her photo. She found it. The same thing Alex did, and that was enough. Jonah's obsession began where most do, with denial masquerading as curiosity. He told himself he was just researching, that he wasn't buying into the urban legends, that he didn't believe in ghost towns or vanishing roads. But that changed the moment he saw the map. It started with coordinates embedded in a cached version of Tasha's final upload. They led to nothing, literally, open space. But on one specific map provider, if you zoomed in close enough and toggled the 2019 satellite view, something flickered into view. A dirt road. a cluster of rooftops. Too precise to be an error, too small to matter to the world at large. That was the thing about places like Briar Ridge, they didn't need to be hidden. They just needed to be unnoticed. Jonah packed a bag that night. No message to his sister, no email to his boss. Just a single envelope left on his desk with "If I vanish, check wrote 219. The drive from Pittsburgh took 6 hours. The air changed the moment he turned onto the road. It wasn't a smell or a pressure. It was something else. A hush that coated the inside of the car, like the world had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. His GPS lost signal. The music app on his phone reset to factory settings. His phone blinked twice and then powered down completely, despite being fully charged. He should have turned back. Every nerve in his body told him so. But then he saw the sign. A rusted, hand-painted wooden board leaned at an angle near the tree line, "Welcome to Briar Ridge." The letters were smeared, as if drawn with wet ash, and below them, barely legible, a tagline: "Founded 1823, still here, still here." That part rattled him. The town emerged slowly from the mist, like something reluctant to be seen. Small homes, each pristine in ways that defied weather or time. White picket fences without a single broken slat. Lawns trimmed with the kind of obsessive precision only found in model towns or dreams. Every window bore curtains. Every house had a door slightly ajar, as if inviting, as if daring. Jonah parked on the gravel near what looked like a general store. It had an old Coca-Cola sign above the door and a rocking chair on the porch that creaked, though no one sat in it. There was no breeze. He stepped out into silence. Not complete silence. There was the faint buzz of insects, the occasional snap of a branch in the woods. But it all felt staged, like ambient noise meant to make you feel safe, to fool you into thinking this was just another forgotten place. He walked down Main Street. No people, but again, signs of life. A bakery with fresh loaves on display. A barber shop where scissors sat poised mid-air above a mannequin head, as though someone had stepped away for just a moment. Jonah leaned closer to the glass, and his breath fogged it. When it cleared, he swore he saw movement inside, a shadow darting past the counter. He backed away. The town square held a fountain, bone dry but clean. A plaque at its base read, "To those who remain, may time stand still in your favor." The words didn't make sense at first, but they felt heavy, weighted with more than meaning. He turned a corner, and there she was. The girl in the red dress, just as the footage had shown. She stood in front of a house at the end of the lane, arms at her sides, her gaze fixed on Jonah with quiet interest. Her dress didn't flutter, her hair didn't move, but her eyes, they pulsed with something ancient, something watching through her. Jonah froze. Every instinct told him not to move. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. And then, slowly, she raised one hand and pointed, not at him, at the house behind her. Jonah blinked, and she was gone. The door to the house creaked open. He shouldn't have gone in. He knew it. But this wasn't a place where choice worked like it should, so he stepped through the threshold. The air inside was warm, lived in. The smell of cinnamon and pine hit him like a memory he didn't own. The interior was the normal, wooden floors, faded wallpaper, family photos. But the faces in the photos were scratched out, each one deep and violent. As if the images themselves had offended whoever lived there, he moved through the rooms. A soft humming came from upstairs, low and rhythmic, familiar. He climbed. At the end of the hallway was a room with a half-open door. The humming came from inside. He pushed it open. A woman sat at a vanity, brushing hair that wasn't hers. Her scalp was raw, strips of torn skin clinging to clumps of dark hair that matched neither her features nor the strands she brushed. Her face was hollow, stretched too tightly over sharp bones. Her eyes met his in the mirror. "You're not supposed to see us yet," she said calmly. Jonah stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. The woman stood, but she didn't move. 1 second she was seated. The next, she was standing inches from him, her breath cold despite the warm air. "But now that you have," she whispered, "you'll help us leave." He ran. The stairs were longer on the way down, as if the house was shifting, stretching. Behind him, footsteps followed, but not with urgency. Like a predator allowing a head start, he burst through the front door and out into the street. Only the street was gone. In its place, rows and rows of the same house. Identical. Endless. Each door slightly ajar, each whispering his name. The town had folded in on itself, a maze built from memories not his own. And somewhere, he could hear the girl humming the same tune the woman had. He screamed for help. Someone answered, but not with words. From every house, something began to emerge. Not people. Not quite. Shapes that twitched in wrong rhythms, with limbs that bent too many ways. Each wore a mask of a different face, some he recognized. Tasha, Alex, his mother, even himself. Jonah ran. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the woods. There, waiting by the same rusted sign, stood the girl again. She was smiling now. "You looked," she said softly. "So now you belong." Behind him, the town pulsed with light. The houses shifted again, folding and refolding, consuming each other. And then everything went dark. Jonah woke up on the side of the highway, mile marker 147. No town, no road, no girl. But in his hand was a photograph, aged and water damaged. A snapshot of Briar Ridge. And in the window of one house, barely visible unless you knew to look, was the outline of a man, Jonah Tell, staring out, mouth open in a silent scream. Jonah Tell tried to convince himself it had been a dream, a hallucination. He told himself that stress, sleep deprivation, and the weight of unanswered questions had finally cracked him open. But dreams didn't leave bruises. They didn't leave muddy shoes, torn clothes, or a photograph folded into your fist like a secret begging to stay hidden. He spent the next 5 days holed up in a motel room 30 miles from the place that no longer existed, chained, smoking, and staring at the photo of himself in that impossible window. He didn't remember standing in that house, didn't remember looking out that window. And yet, there he was, his outline unmistakable, face frozen in that agonized expression, as though he had glimpsed something behind the lens. Something staring back. The motel TV stayed on around the clock. Jonah flipped channels mindlessly, anything to drown out the silence that seemed to have followed him from Briar Ridge. It wasn't until the static started that he began to really unravel. It was the third night. The picture on the TV glitched for a moment. A flicker, nothing more, and then went black. A second later, snow filled the screen, white noise. But it wasn't random. The static pulsed in patterns, like Morse code, and underneath the hiss, something else emerged. A voice, faint, wet, like someone whispering through a mouthful of river water. "Jonah." He jumped from the bed, stumbling backward until his legs hit the dresser. The voice came again, clearer now. Still looking good. "It means the door stayed open." He unplugged the TV. The screen didn't change. The voice continued. "You let us out. Thank you." Then laughter. Not joyous. Not cruel. Just wrong. A sound that didn't belong in this world. Something pretending to be amused. Jonah ran. He didn't even check out. Just grabbed his keys and drove until the motel was a smudge in the rear view. But the further he got, the louder the static became. It wasn't just in the motel. It was in the radio now. In the engine. In his own ears. Like something had nested inside him. Listening. Speaking only when it knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. He stopped at a roadside diner just outside of Eerie, hoping the noise would fade. It didn't. But something else happened. The waitress brought him coffee. Black, no sugar. Just how he liked it, though he hadn't ordered yet. "You look tired," she said. "Rough roads ahead." Jonah managed a nod. She poured his refill before he touched the first cup. "It's always worse after the third visit." He froze. "What?" She didn't blink. The first time, it watches. Second, it learns. Third time, she smiled. Too wide, teeth too perfect. That's when it speaks. Jonah left the money on the table and walked out, heart hammering. He didn't look back. He didn't want to see what her face had become. He drove to his sister's place in Chicago. She was the only person he trusted not to write him off as crazy. But when she opened the door, her expression changed instantly. "Jonah," she said slowly, almost fearfully. "You already came by," he frowned. "No, what?" "2 days ago," she insisted. "You said you needed to talk. You looked different. Worn. Your voice sounded wrong. You hugged me, and you said you forgave me." Jonah took a step back. "I haven't seen you in a year," he whispered. "I've been in Pennsylvania." Her eyes filled with tears. "You came here, I swear. You stayed for hours. But then you disappeared in the middle of the night." I thought. But she didn't finish. Because her daughter came running down the stairs, clutching something in her hand. "Uncle Joe?" the little girl shouted, eyes wide with joy.
You left this!
She handed him a worn audio recorder. It was identical to the one Alex Mercer had used. Jonah pressed play, hands trembling. His voice began speaking, but it was off, stiff, disjointed, as if someone had stitched together pieces of his real voice and glued them into a sentence. "Hello. This is Jonah Tell. I've been to Briar Ridge. I have seen the others. The doors are open. We can walk now." Then a chorus of whispers. "We can walk now. We can walk now. We can." Jonah slammed the recorder to the floor, shattering it. His sister screamed. Her daughter cried. And in the silence that followed, Jonah understood one thing with bone deep certainty. He hadn't left the town behind. It had followed him. Or worse, it had sent something ahead. He stayed the night only because his sister begged him to. She didn't understand, but she saw enough fear in his eyes to know he wasn't making any of it up. They sat in the living room after the girl was asleep, lights off, curtains drawn, while Jonah explained what he could. But even as he spoke, the room felt smaller, like it was inching closer. He kept checking the corners, half expecting to see a girl in a red dress, or that faceless woman from the house. But the room remained empty, until the radio clicked on by itself. It was an old unit his sister kept on a shelf for background noise while cooking. She swore it hadn't worked in years, but now it was working, static, followed by the voice. Different this time. A man's voice, calm, clear. "Jonah Tell," it said. "We borrowed your shape. It fits well. The skin took time to stitch, but now they believe. Everyone believes." Jonah rushed to the radio and yanked the plug. The voice kept talking. "More doors will open now. You helped us speak, helped us learn." And then came the sound. A dragging, wet sound. Like flesh being peeled from wood. Like something crawling through a crack too narrow for its body. He smashed the radio with a lamp, but it was too late. Down the hallway the bathroom light flicked on. No one had entered. His sister stood, trembling. "Did you hear that? No one goes down there," he said, stepping in front of her. "Take your daughter. Get out of the house." She didn't argue. Jonah took a kitchen knife and crept down the hallway. The door to the bathroom was open a crack. Inside, the shower curtain was drawn. Water dripped steadily, though no faucet was on. He stepped in, heart thudding. The mirror was fogged. He wiped it and gasped. His own face stared back. But it smiled. And the smile didn't stop. Didn't move. The reflection didn't blink. Jonah backed out, slammed the door, and ran. By the time he reached the street, his sister was already in her car, her daughter crying in the back seat. They drove away and didn't look back. Jonah stood there under the streetlight, unsure what part of him was still his. Because somewhere in Briar Ridge something had worn his face. And now it was walking free. The door had stayed open too long. And soon, the others would walk through. The hardest thing to accept wasn't that something had come back with Jonah. It was that it could pass for him. That something could wear his voice, his mannerisms, his childhood memories like a second skin. In the days that followed the incident at his sister's house, Jonah moved like a fugitive in his own skin. Paranoia became ritual, checking mirrors twice, speaking aloud to test the shape of his words. Watching people's reactions to him like their expressions might betray a secret only they could see. But they didn't see it. Not yet. Not unless they really looked. That was the trick. The imitation was never perfect. There were cracks. Small ones. But most people never stared long enough to notice. Because why would they? Familiarity makes people blind. Everyone trusts what they recognize. Jonah no longer did. After his sister fled with her daughter to a cousin's house across the state, he booked a basement apartment under a fake name and disconnected from everything. No phone, no cards, no internet. Just a pocket notebook, 2 pens, and the audio recorder he picked up from a pawn shop in town. He started documenting every moment, every dream, every noise in the night, because the whispers hadn't stopped. They'd only gotten closer. The first sign came in the form of a letter slipped under his door. No envelope. Just a single page, yellowed and curling at the corners, like it had aged decades in a matter of hours. There were 3 lines you stepped through. You carried us out. Now you must be our voice. The handwriting was stiff and angular, like someone trying to remember how to form letters. Like a child mimicking penmanship by watching others write. That night, Jonah dreamed of the house again. The same house from Briar Ridge, the one with the girl out front and the faceless woman inside. But this time, it was empty. Not abandoned, but waiting. Every drawer open, every bed made, every light on, and in the center of the living room stood a mirror. Not mounted, just leaning against a chair, wrapped in barbed wire. He approached, heart pounding. His reflection looked back. Not as he was, but older, sickly, decayed. Skin peeling at the edges. Eyes dark and bleeding at the corners. And then the reflection spoke, not with his voice. Tasha was the first to see us, it said. Alex was the first to bring us. But you, Jonah, you are the first we can stay with. He woke up screaming. From that night forward, he kept every mirror covered. But avoiding reflections didn't stop the changes. On the 5th morning in the basement flat, he noticed something wrong with his voice. Not hoarse, not sick, just wrong. It lagged slightly behind his thoughts, like it was remembering the words a fraction of a second too late. If he tried to talk while thinking of something else, the words would slur. He tested it obsessively, recording himself reading passages, whispering nonsense, reciting memories. In one of the recordings, right before he hit stop, he heard a whisper behind his own voice. It said, "Let us finish the sentence." That's when he started seeing the others. They never appeared in crowds, never directly, always at the edge of his vision, on buses, behind fogged glass, in blurred reflections of car windows or puddles, faces too pale, smiles too tight, movements just a little too synchronized, like bad actors in a play they'd only rehearsed once. One followed him into a grocery store, a man in a brown coat, wearing his own face, badly. It was the same bone structure, same eye color, but stretched too thin. The imitation had forgotten to blink. It trailed him silently through the cereal aisle, past the produce section, even to the self-checkout. And then, just as Jonah turned to confront it vanished. He checked the security footage later. The man wasn't on it. Just Jonah alone, looking over his shoulder at nothing. But he knew better. They were testing him. He fled the city the next day. He didn't leave a note. Didn't pack more than a bag. Just drove west until the road curved in unfamiliar ways. His goal wasn't escape. He knew better. It was understanding. If they'd chosen him, if something inside Briar Ridge had stitched itself to him, he had to figure out why and how. So he drove back toward the lake, not to Briar Ridge, to below it. There had been whispers on old message boards, in discarded journals found in library basements, of something deeper than the town, something older, before the dam, before the name Briar Ridge ever existed, a church, swallowed by water, left to rot. Local legends said it was founded in the 1800s by a breakaway cult. a group obsessed with silence. They believed noise attracted the pale ones, and that silence was the only defense. Their services were wordless. Their prayers, if you could call them that, were scratches in wood and stone. The church, called St. Mercy Hollow, was drowned along with the original township when the Edison Dam flooded the valley. But some say it didn't drown. Not really. Jonah found the entrance by accident, or maybe it found him. He was driving along a ridge trail when the road began to shake. Not an earthquake, just a gentle rumble, like a large engine waking far below. Then the road cracked. A sinkhole opened, swallowing half the pavement. Inside, darkness and stone steps. He parked at an angle, grabbed his flashlight, and descended. The air was thick with rot, but dry. Dust clung to his skin like it recognized him. The flashlight flickered the deeper he went, as though some frequency down there rejected electric light. At the bottom, he found it. A room, circular. Carved stone walls lined with bones. In the center, a pulpit made of blackened wood, and behind it, tall, cracked, and bound in iron, stood a mirror, the same one from his dream. It hadn't been metaphor. It was real. He approached, pulse racing. The mirror reflected nothing but darkness at first. Then, as he raised the flashlight, something moved inside it. Not his reflection. A town, Briar Ridge, not as it was, but as it is now. Endless, shifting, alive. He reached out. The mirror's surface rippled. And from behind him, a voice, his voice, said, "It's better when we both look." He turned, but no one stood there. Only his shadow. Smiling back, he backed away. But the walls had changed. The entrance was gone, replaced with hallways, doors, a layout that mimicked the town. He wasn't in a church anymore. He was in it again, Briar Ridge. Even here, especially here, because it never needed roads. Only a mirror, only a voice, only someone to carry it back. The thing about Briar Ridge, once you step into it, really step into it, it starts remembering you. Not like a place remembers, not with landmarks or forgotten keys on dusty countertops. It remembers you, your voice, your walk, your past, your guilt. It knows how to pull you apart slowly, thread by thread, until the only thing left of you is the version it chooses to keep. Jonah Tell was learning this one hallway at a time. He didn't know how long he had been down there. The concept of time warped beneath the surface. The air didn't move. The dust didn't settle. His phone was useless, the battery long dead, though it still buzzed in his pocket like it received notifications from somewhere. And the messages, when he dared turn it on, were always the same. BK Yimustad UR Va I show yo UR Navi UR Elon, and each message timestamped at 3:17 a.m. That number again. Every door he passed led to another version of the same impossible place. A kitchen table set for three, with warm food and empty chairs. A child's room with toys still ticking, and a mobile spinning above a crib with no baby. A hospital hallway with no end. The overhead lights flickering as if sensing with the beat of his heart. At first, Jonah thought it was a maze. Then he realized it was a memory. Twisted, reassembled by something that had watched him long enough to know how to make it hurt. The worst room was the one where his mother sat waiting. She was exactly as he remembered before the accident: soft hands, tired eyes, always wearing that pale blue robe she wouldn't throw away even after it frayed at the sleeves. She looked up when he entered, smiled, and patted the seat beside her on the old sofa. "You're early," she said kindly, as if he'd just returned from school. "Dinner's not ready yet." He stood frozen. "You're not real," he said hoarsely. Her smile didn't waver. "You always say that when you're scared." She picked up the remote and turned on the TV. Static, always static. Jonah backed away, but the room didn't let him leave. The walls extended. The door vanished. He turned, and there she was again. Closer this time, standing now, her face softening into something less human. "You came back," she said. "We were so hungry for your shape." Her voice split, layered, a dozen mouths speaking through her. Jonah screamed and lunged at the nearest window, expecting to crash through. Instead, he passed through like smoke and landed in snow. When he looked up, he was standing in the middle of the Briar Ridge town square. The fountain was dry again. But this time, the girl in the red dress wasn't alone. She stood at the edge of the square surrounded by others, people he recognized. Tasha, Alex, his own face again, older, warped, lips stitched shut. Each one wore a copy of someone real. Each one moved like a puppet whose strings had long since tangled. "You're back where you belong," the girl said. Her voice echoed strangely, not in volume but in direction. He couldn't tell where it came from. Behind him, inside him, he turned to run. But there were more now. Dozens, hundreds, all standing silently along the streets, watching, faces blank, waiting. He stumbled toward a side alley, the only path not blocked. The others didn't chase. They didn't need to, because Briar Ridge wasn't a place you escaped by running. He emerged into a schoolyard. Familiar, sickeningly so. This was his elementary school, rebuilt perfectly down to the chipped paint on the monkey bars. The chalkboard still bore his name, written in child scrawl. On the desk, his fourth grade drawing of a house, the one he drew on the day his father left. The bell rang, and that's when the children entered. Dozens of them, all identical, all versions of him as a boy, ranging in age, clothes, moods. Some crying, some staring blankly, one drawing with a crayon made of bone. "You never got over it," one said, not looking up, so we kept it. "We wear your memories like a coat," another added. "They fit so well." Jonah backed into a closet and slammed the door. He collapsed to the floor, shaking, sweating. His breath fogged the air even though the room was warm. And in that fog, he saw movement, not in front of him, inside him. A figure forming in the reflection of his own exhale, watching from inside his lungs. He screamed again and punched the wall, which gave way not to splinters, but water, cold and black, rushing in. He was drowning. He kicked, clawed, tried to reach the surface, but it was like swimming through tar. 1,000 voices rose around him, calling his name, dragging at his limbs. And then, light. He broke the surface, gasping, coughing, and realized he was in a river. But not just any river. The lake had drained. The Edison Reservoir was gone. What remained was a deep, choked trench filled with bones and rusted foundations. Ruins of a town that once existed, and apparently still did. He climbed onto the bank, panting, and saw the remains of a road leading down into the depths. Someone stood there. Not a stranger. Tasha. But not the version he remembered. Her skin was pale, tinged with something gray beneath, and her eyes glowed faintly in the shadows. "Jonah," she said, "you made it back. That means it's time." "For what?" he managed to rasp. She tilted her head, smiling gently. "Time for you to remember who you were before you left the gate open." And suddenly, he did remember. Not everything, not clearly, just flashes. The first visit hadn't been as a journalist. It hadn't even been his idea. It had been a dare. A foolish trip in college. 4 friends. A rumor about a town that moved when you blinked. He hadn't told anyone because no one would have believed it. They'd walked into Briar Ridge in the dead of night with flashlights, cheap whiskey, and a camcorder. Only he had walked out, and never remembered until now. Tasha stepped closer. "They never really let you leave," she whispered. "They just sent a piece of you ahead, to watch, to listen, to invite others in." He stumbled back. No, that's not true. But deep down, he felt the hollow ache. The part of him that never felt present since college. The part that always watched his own life like a bad broadcast. The missing part. Tasha smiled. Eyes now weeping black fluid. "It's all right," she said. "You're almost whole again." Behind her, the town reassembled itself from the ruins. Houses rose from dirt. Trees unraveled like film in reverse. Street lamps blinked on. And then came the final horror. A sign, freshly painted. BRIR Ready GE, Piopulion 1. And then, as Jonah fell to his knees, the sign changed. Piopulition 2, because he had finally come home. Jonah no longer trusted his own breath. Each inhale felt like it belonged to someone else, something else, and maybe it did. Maybe the air in Briar Ridge wasn't really air at all, but memory in vapor form, pressing against his lungs, trying to get in. It whispered on the way down, not in words, but with impressions. Grief, shame, guilt, emotions so thick they clung to his ribs like damp cloth. He sat on the edge of what had once been the Edison Reservoir, staring at the town now half, rebuilt from ruin, and realized the most terrifying truth of all: he hadn't been lured back. He'd been summoned, and something deep below the ground had always known he'd come. The wind moved wrong here. It didn't blow, it circled, like it was sniffing for cracks in his skin. It carried a low hum, buried beneath silence, a constant pressure just beyond hearing, like a faraway choir humming through broken throats. He clutched his knees to his chest and listened, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't stop. The hum grew stronger the longer he sat. Then, suddenly, it stopped, and for a moment, the silence wasn't empty. It was expectant. From the woods behind him came a soft crunch of leaves. Jonah spun. A figure emerged, slow, careful, almost shy. It wasn't one of them. Not yet. He could tell because it walked like a person. Hesitant. Like it didn't quite know if it was supposed to be here. She was young, maybe 18. A handheld camera dangled from a strap around her neck, blinking red. She froze when she saw him. "You're real," she said. Jonah stood slowly. "Who are you?" "Maeve," she replied. "Maeve Lorne. Tasha was my sister." The name hit him like a fist. Jonah's mouth went dry. "You shouldn't be here." Maeve stepped closer, eyes wide. "I had to find out what happened. No one in my family talks about her. It's like she never existed. But I saw the footage. I read the notes she left. She was scared of this place, and now I know why." Jonah shook his head. "You don't understand. They don't let you come. They pull you in. You're not here by accident." Maeve's camera whined. The red light blinked faster. Jonah looked at the lens and felt sick. "Did you record anything?" he asked sharply. "Only background. Just static mostly. Delete it." "What?" "Delete it now." Maeve hesitated, fingers hovering over the buttons. "Why? Because the more you record, the more they see. And if they see too much, they don't just follow you back. They take your place." The words left his mouth without thought, as if someone else had whispered them through his tongue. Maeve stared at him, then quickly shut the camera off, pulling the battery free. But it was already too late. Behind her, the trees shifted. Not moved, shifted, like a stage reset between scenes. From between the trunks, 3 figures stepped out. They weren't trying to hide. They didn't need to. One was an exact copy of Maeve, down to the scuff on her left sneaker. Another was Jonah, but thinner, hunched like it had worn the wrong bones too long. The third was neither of them. It was a child, but not the red, dressed girl from before. This one had no eyes. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over where they should have been, and a mouth that never closed. It just hung open, as though frozen mid-scream. Jonah pulled Maeve behind him, heart pounding. "Don't speak. Don't acknowledge them." The doppelgangers stepped forward, mirroring their every move. Jonah took a step back. They did too. But then, the child moved on its own, fast. Jerked forward with a sound like cracking branches and wet cloth. Maeve gasped. The thing froze. Its head turned slowly, listening. Jonah grabbed her wrist. They hunt sound. That's how they find what to wear. They ran. Not through the woods, back into the town. Back into the twisting streets of Briar Ridge. The deeper they went, the louder the hum returned. Except now it wasn't in the wind. It was in the buildings. Doors vibrated with it. Windows rattled. Signs flickered. Each structure seemed to chant in its own broken tongue, as if trying to out-sing the others. And from every alley, every porch, every rooftop, they watched. The imitators, hundreds of them, all waiting, but not for Jonah, for Maeve. Because she was new, they liked new. She pulled him into the shell of an old church. The wooden doors groaned but held shut behind them. Candles burned on the altar. No flame. Just light. Thin, grayish light like television static. "What is this place?" Maeve asked, panting. Jonah looked around. "It's not real. None of this is." Maeve walked to the altar and placed her hand over the book lying open there. Words wreathed across the page like insects, forming sentences only long enough to be read before collapsing back into gibberish. "They're praying," she whispered. "But not to God." "No," Jonah said. "They pray to us." A bang echoed outside. Then another. Wood splintered. The door cracked. "They're coming," he said. "They're going to take you. They'll wear your face, your memories, your voice." Maeve looked at him. "How did you survive?" Jonah stared back, empty. "I didn't." The door exploded inward. Light flooded the church, blinding and full of sound. Not voices, not music, just sound itself. The idea of sound, it filled every inch of him. And then, nothing. Darkness. Silence. Jonah woke to Maeve screaming. But it wasn't her voice. It was too high, too smooth, too perfect. He scrambled to his feet. Maeve stood near the altar, arms stiff at her sides. Her mouth was open, but her eyes weren't panicked. They were calm, like she was at peace. Then her body convulsed, and from her mouth came two voices. Her own and something older, layered together like oil and water. "We like this one," it said. Jonah reached for her, but his hand passed through. She wasn't there anymore, only the shape of her. The skin she left behind, and on the altar, burned into the surface of the book, 3 words appeared, permanent this time. "Next ISU." Jonah stepped back, breath gone. He looked down at his hands. They were changing, skin turning pale, fingers lengthening. And beneath the silence, the hum sang louder. Because the thing inside him was almost done listening. Now it wanted to speak. Jonah Tell no longer recognized his own hands. The skin had gone tight over the knuckles, like parchment stretched too far. The lines on his palms had begun to blur, not vanish, but shift, rearranging into shapes that didn't belong on human flesh. Some curled like spiral scripts, others jagged like fractures in glass. He didn't need a mirror to know what had started inside was now working its way out. The Briar Ridge infection wasn't like a virus. It didn't burn or blister. It remembered. It learned. It copied. It rewrote. He stumbled from the church, eyes burning in the cold daylight. Except it wasn't real day. The sky above Briar Ridge remained that same nauseating gray it always had. Neither dawn nor dusk. With a sun that hovered just below the clouds, but never fully showed its face. The town pulsed around him, alive in its stillness. Every door and window watching him with a patience that bordered on hunger. Maeve was gone. Whatever remained of her stood silently at the edge of the square, swaying gently like a puppet awaiting command. Her body moved, yes, but the person was lost. The voice that had poured from her mouth inside the church still echoed in Jonah's ears. 2 voices layered, hers and something else. Something wearing her, even as it polished her memories and rethreaded them for its own use. He couldn't save her. He hadn't saved anyone. And the worst part, the part he couldn't stop thinking about, was that maybe she was never meant to be saved. Maybe Maeve was just the next placeholder, the next skin. And now that it had her, it didn't need him anymore. Except it hadn't let him go. That thought chilled him more than anything else. It wasn't done with him. He kept walking through the square, past the houses that now shifted subtly when he wasn't looking directly at them. They seemed to rearrange themselves in the corners of his vision. A house on the left became one on the right. Windows multiplied. Porches swapped colors. Addresses changed. Briar Ridge was folding itself again, reconfiguring its paths like it was preparing for something. Or someone. At the corner of Hollow Street and Ridgeview Lane, he stopped. The house before him was familiar, not because he had seen it before, but because it wanted him to recognize it. He approached, legs numb, and saw the number carved into the mailbox, 38. That number hadn't meant anything to him in years. It was the number of the apartment he'd lived in during college. During the summer, he and his friends first heard the legend of Briar Ridge. The summer they came here, the door creaked open before he touched it. Inside, the house didn't look like an abandoned structure in a ghost town. It looked exactly like the apartment he once shared. The same water-stained ceiling, the same scarred floorboards, even the poster of Kubrick's The Shining hanging crooked over the old sofa. He stepped in, and the door shut behind him. This wasn't a replica. This was memory, rendered in wood and plaster and time. There were photos on the fridge, real ones. Candids of him and his friends Marcus, Elena, Bryn. All three had vanished after that night in the woods, years ago. He had been the only one to stumble back to the highway, barefoot and bloody, remembering nothing, or so he thought. A sound came from the bedroom down the hall, a wet, dragging sound. Jonah turned slowly. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, gaunt, wrapped in damp bedsheets that clung to its limbs like skin. Marcus. Or something that wore what was left of Marcus. Its face was half-formed, like wet clay. The jaw moved without sound. Jonah backed into the kitchen. More sounds came. Elena's laugh, except it came from beneath the floorboards. Bryn's voice, except it came from inside the refrigerator. The syllables shuddering with frost. The lights flickered. Then came the silence. That same thick, weighted quiet that marked Briar Ridge's moments of choice. Jonah reached for the only weapon he could find, a carving knife from the drawer, and turned to face the hallway. But the hallway was gone. In its place, a mirror, tall, cracked, framed in warped wood. His reflection stood inside it. Not just him, a version of him. This Jonah was smiling. The same, too, wide smile worn by the thing pretending to be Maeve. Jonah gripped the knife tighter. The mirror Jonah lifted a hand and pointed to the table. Jonah turned. There, resting neatly at the center, lay a cassette tape, unlabeled. Beside it, a small, battery-operated recorder. Already running, he pressed play. His own voice crackled through the static, but not him. Not his now voice. It was younger. We thought it was just a game, the tape said. Briar Ridge was a campfire story. We didn't believe it. Until the girl came. A pause. Then she said we could stay forever. That all we had to do was stop speaking our own names. The voice trembled. She tricked us. We stopped saying who we were. And then we forgot. And once we forgot, they were us. Click. The tape ended. Jonah stepped back from the table, breathing hard. The reflection in the mirror mimicked every movement, except it still smiled. Then it spoke. I never forgot, it said. Jonah blinked. What? The reflection's mouth didn't move. The sound came from behind the mirror. I am the part of you that remembered this place, it continued. That knew what happened to Marcus, to Alina, to Bryn. Jonah shook his head. No. That's not true. You didn't escape, the voice said. You were allowed to leave. Because they needed someone to remember the gate, someone to open it again. The air in the house began to pulse. Walls rippled. Objects trembled. The reflection reached out through the glass, hand cracking the surface like ice. Jonah ran. Out the door, into the street, which now twisted in directions that defied logic. The town wasn't just alive now, it was awake. Every building throbbed with low, subsonic tones. The imitation of Maeve stepped out of the pharmacy, her mouth stretching wider than human anatomy should allow. From the school, a dozen children emerged. Identical, faceless, arms outstretched. From the church, a bell rang, though there was no tower. And from the center of the square, the girl in the red dress returned. But she was older now. She had aged. Or rather, the thing inside her had. Her skin peeled in layers. Her eyes glowed with deep-rooted hunger. Her voice, when she spoke, cracked the sky. You remembered your name too long. Jonah Tell, she said. The ground beneath him split. Hands reached up, not to grab, but to offer, to pull him down gently, to finish what you started. The buildings crumbled. The sky peeled open like film catching fire. And the sound, the real sound, the one beneath everything, grew louder. A heartbeat, but not his, not the town's. Something deeper, older than Briar Ridge, older than memory, and it was waking up. Jonah fell to his knees. He opened his mouth to scream, but the sound that came out wasn't his own. Jonah Tell's scream never made it past his teeth. It caught somewhere in his throat and twisted, curling back down into his lungs like smoke inhaled through a funeral shroud. His mouth hung open, but the sound that filled the air wasn't coming from him. It bled from the ground, from the houses, from the spaces between each breath in this thing that only pretended to be a town. It was laughter, but not the kind meant for joy. It was laughter made of knives, layered over the dying gasps of everyone who had come before him and failed to forget. He staggered to his feet, hands clutching his head as the heartbeat beneath Briar Ridge pounded louder, heavier. It wasn't just pulsing now, it was counting. Something ancient and long buried was beginning to measure him. He could feel it in the back of his skull, ticking like a metronome not built for music but for ritual, for consumption. The ground trembled, and the sky above him began to fracture, not with lightning, but with memory. Streaks of his own life split the clouds. The night he first heard of Briar Ridge, the first time he saw Tasha's footage. Maeve's blank stare before the voice inside her spoke. They played out in flashes, jagged and violent, over a sky that was no longer made of weather, but film strip. As if this place wasn't just feeding on him, but replaying him. And then came the moment that broke him. In one of the floating memories overhead, he saw himself. Not just younger, but untouched. He was laughing, sitting around a campfire with Marcus, Elena, and Bryn before the dare, before the town, before they went looking. He was whole. Then a voice, his own, echoed from the past. I don't believe in that shit. A town that takes your name. Sure. What does it do? Ask politely. The others had laughed. But now, here in the ruins of a town that was never truly a town, Jonah understood. That had been the mistake. The first invitation. Because Briar Ridge never asked for names. It waited for you to offer them freely. And he had. They all had. The girl in the red dress was moving now. Her steps were slow, deliberate, arms swaying at her sides like she was puppeteering herself with unseen strings. The skin on her arms peeled in curls as she walked, revealing muscle that didn't bleed and bone that pulsed with dim light. You gave it freely, she said. You gave your name, and then you forgot the weight of it. But names are not noise, Jonah Tell. They are permission. He turned and ran again. But the town no longer had direction. Streets folded in on themselves. Alleys repeated endlessly. Houses collapsed and rebuilt in real time, shifting to herd him. They wanted him to reach a certain point, and deep down, he knew what that was. The center, where it had all started, where the gate had first opened. His feet stopped moving when he reached the clearing where the town hall once stood. Now, only a massive crater remained, circular black and pulsing with something that looked like water but moved like shadow. At the edge of the pit, a single chair, a child's chair, and on it a small recorder, his own, the one he had used in college, the one he had thrown away years ago. He stepped forward, breath shallow, and picked it up. It turned on without touch. The speaker buzzed, and then his own voice, 15 years younger, spoke through the static. This is Jonah Tell, signing off. And if I disappear, it's because Briar Ridge found me first. A pause, then laughter, not his, not human. From the crater something rose, not fast, not slow, just inevitable. A mass of faces, hundreds, thousands interlocked, all wearing someone, all moving in sync. Their mouths opened as one, and the sound that poured out was not a scream, not a growl. It was his name, over and over. Jonah Tell, Jonah Tell. Until it meant nothing. Until it unraveled. He fell to his knees, weeping now, because the truth finally came. He hadn't escaped Briar Ridge that night in college. He had been made its mouthpiece. Every article he wrote, every documentary he chased, Every story he fed into the world about haunted towns and forgotten roads, it had all been part of the pattern. The infection wasn't in the place. It was in the telling. It didn't need to trap you if it could simply be remembered. And Jonah had remembered. More than anyone. A final voice rose above the others now. The original one. The one that had always worn the red dress. She stepped into the crater, hovering above the mass of flesh and shadow, arms raised. Jonah, tell, you have served, and so you may rest. He smiled through his tears. He whispered his name one last time and felt it crumble like ash in his mouth. And then, he was gone. Not dead, not destroyed. Just repurposed. His face joined the others in the pit. His voice became part of the hum. And somewhere, in a room hundreds of miles away, a child sat watching an old video on a phone they weren't supposed to have. A video titled The Town That Only Exists If You Know Its Name. And beneath that video, a single comment posted just moments ago, come and see. Ask for me by name, the username, Jonah Tell Official. Miles away from where Jonah Tell was taken. Folded into the gaping mouth of memory that masqueraded as Briar Ridge, an 11-year-old boy named Calvin Mercer sat alone in his bedroom with the lights off and his headphones on, hunched over his glowing tablet. The house around him was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional creak of old floorboards expanding with the late summer heat. Calvin didn't notice the dark or the silence. He was deep in a rabbit hole he hadn't meant to fall into. It started as an innocent school project, write about an urban legend from your state. Most kids picked Bigfoot sightings, haunted graveyards, the Jersey Devil. Calvin picked something obscure he'd overheard his uncle mention once after too much bourbon, the town that watches back. He hadn't known it had a name, but after 5 minutes of searching, he found it. Or rather, it found him. Briar Ridge. At first, there wasn't much. Just garbled message boards, archived posts, and videos with distorted thumbnails that disappeared hours after being uploaded. But one thread in particular stood out, posted under a dead forum titled Needle in the Vein. A single entry, dated just 3 days prior. Read if you're reading this, it's already listening. They use children first, they always have. Below it, a link. A grainy video started playing immediately. No buffering, no play button. The first frame was Jonah Tell's face, or what used to be his face. The image glitched. Then came the voice, not a greeting, not a warning, a whisper. Say the name. Whisper it back. Calvin leaned closer, unable to help himself. He didn't speak aloud, he only thought the name, and something in the room changed. The silence didn't deepen, it tilted. He sat back, suddenly aware of the sound of his own breath, loud and shallow through his nose. A chill ran down his arms despite the warmth of the summer air. Then, from his earbuds came a low static, barely audible. But beneath it, a voice, a child's voice. You heard us, it whispered. So now we hear you. Calvin tore the headphones off, but the voice didn't stop. It was in the room now. Behind him. He turned, slow and rigid, expecting his closet door to be cracked open, or the curtains to be moving in a draft that wasn't there. But nothing had changed, except the reflection in the screen. It was still him, but his mouth was moving, smiling. He wasn't. And then it spoke again. Where's your name, Calvin? The lights flickered. His tablet powered off, and from beneath his bed came the unmistakable creak of weight shifting on the floorboards. He didn't scream. He couldn't. His mouth wouldn't open. He blinked, and the room reset, everything normal again. Tablet in his lap, lights steady, breath returning. The video was gone. Even the browser history had erased itself. But the voice hadn't left. It whispered at the edge of his thoughts, curling around the base of his skull like damp smoke. Calvin didn't sleep that night. When his mother found him in the morning, he was sitting in the hallway, facing the bathroom mirror, eyes red from holding them open too long. He didn't look at her when she spoke. Instead, he whispered to his reflection, I didn't say it. Not out loud. That still counts, right? She tried to laugh it off, gently steered him to breakfast. But in the corner of the bathroom mirror, just before she turned off the light, she caught something. A flash of another face, pale, featureless, watching, and it was smiling. That same week, 5 other children across the Northeast reported similar symptoms. Night terrors, mirror fixation, sudden mutism. In one case, a boy in Maine pulled out his own tongue with a plastic spoon. When the doctors sedated him, he kept writing the same 3 words on the hospital wall with his blood, "Don't say it." By the end of the month, local news stations had started to notice a pattern. They didn't call it a phenomenon. Not yet. They called it a viral mimic disorder sweeping through chat apps, forums, and video platforms used by kids under 16. They blamed deepfakes, hypnosis trends, TikTok audio manipulation. Anything but what it really was. Because how do you report on a town that doesn't exist? How do you warn people about a place that only appears when spoken of, that listens for its name in the dark and waits for children to reply? The authorities couldn't explain why the voices only started once the name was thought. They couldn't trace the videos because they weren't being uploaded. They were appearing, piggybacking on other files, replacing harmless content with static, laced whispers and fragments of the same sentence. We remember. Do you? The town was waking up again. Not in space, not in soil, but in the minds of those too young to forget. And every time a child whispered Briar Ridge under their breath, or even imagined it, it smiled. Because this time it wasn't waiting to be found, it was coming to them. In reflection, in dreams, in voice. And somewhere, back in the empty center of what used to be the town, the sign changed again. Population 2471 and climbing. On the morning of September 17th, 8-year-old Maya Renner sat in the corner of her classroom with her hands over her ears, humming a tune no one had taught her. It was soft, low, and wrong, out of key but consistent like a nursery rhyme sung underwater. Her teacher, Mrs. Halvorsen, had noticed the humming the day before. It had started right after a classmate, Julian Carter, mentioned a town with mirrors instead of windows. He'd said it casually, like a joke he'd heard from an older sibling. But when he spoke, 3 other children turned to look at him at the exact same time and smiled without blinking. Mrs. Halvorsen had dismissed it as coincidence. Kids were weird, especially at that age. But now Maya was humming that tune again, and her mouth wasn't moving. Her lips were closed tight, almost clenched. And yet the sound was still coming, as though it was rising from deep in her throat without consent. Maya, the teacher said, kneeling beside her, trying not to let the unease creep into her voice. "Honey, are you okay?" Maya turned slowly. Her eyes were wide but glassy, like she wasn't really seeing her teacher, just looking through her. And then she whispered something so quiet it didn't seem to come from her mouth at all. I gave it my voice. Mrs. Halvorsen felt her stomach drop. She didn't know why. Just 7 words, and none of them made sense on their own. But together, they curled in her mind like something venomous. Later that day, the school nurse called Maya's parents. She said the girl wasn't feverish, didn't show signs of illness or trauma. But something about her demeanor wasn't right. She's still, the nurse had said, as if that were a medical condition. Still in a way children shouldn't be, like she's waiting for something to respond. By the time her father picked her up, Maya had stopped speaking altogether. Not out of fear, not confusion. She simply didn't seem to need to anymore. That night, the Renner household lost power. Their entire street did. No storm, no transformer damage, no explanation. When the lights came back on at 3:17 a.m., the exact minute every device in the house reset, they found Maya standing in front of the television, her eyes fixed on the static screen. There was no video playing, no audio, just the swirling gray fog of a dead signal. Yet Maya was nodding to it, as if it was speaking. Her father called out to her. Once, twice. She didn't turn. Then, without warning, the static resolved. For less than a second. A frame, a house, white, cracked, a mailbox marked 38. Then it cut. Maya finally turned to her parents and said the last sentence she'd utter for 3 days. It knows where we are now. Across the country, other children began to repeat her words. In whispers, in dreams, in perfect unison. Parents thought it was a TikTok challenge, a game, a phrase from some creepy video, but no one could trace its source. Forums tried to connect the pattern, but posts vanished as quickly as they appeared. Audio clips corrupted mid-upload. Screens froze when you tried to record. Eventually, someone realized the truth. There was no source. The phrase wasn't spreading because of content. It was spreading because it had been spoken. Once, and the town had heard it. It had liked it. A week later, in a quiet suburb outside Denver, a local radio DJ named Brianna Ellis was wrapping up her late night shift when the system glitched. For 27 seconds, every station across her frequency range played the same low, pitched hum, followed by a burst of static and one whispered sentence. You don't need to say it out loud anymore. It was the last broadcast of her career. The station was shut down the next morning. No explanation. No technical fault discovered. Brianna was hospitalized under psychiatric care after trying to claw her ears shut with her own nails. When interviewed by a psychologist later that month, the only thing she would say was it wasn't a broadcast. It was a reply. Elsewhere, the pattern continued. Mirrors began to fog from the outside. Children reported hearing footsteps behind their reflections. Some described voices in their heads, voices that mimicked people they knew, people they loved, but were off by just enough to unsettle them. One boy told his parents that his mother had spoken to him from the bathroom mirror while she was still in the kitchen. She said her skin didn't fit right, he told them. But I could help her find one that did. The mother didn't laugh. She checked the bathroom. Found nothing. But later that night, she noticed something odd. Every photo in the house that showed her face had been turned around. Somewhere deep in the tangled space where Briar Ridge didn't exist, but always had, the houses rearranged again. They made room. The fountain filled. The doors unlocked. The building stood straighter, more present, more solid. The town was gaining shape, not through stone, but through recognition. It was no longer about pulling people in. It was about pushing outward, leaking, dripping into the world one voice at a time. And now that children had started whispering back, it had found the most perfect skin to wear. The youngest, the most innocent, the most unquestioned. A message appeared on school projector screens in 5 different cities the following morning, right before morning announcements. Black text, white background. If they speak with your voice, don't answer. If they knock from the mirror, don't look. If they whisper your name, don't think it back. No one could explain how it appeared, or who wrote it. The warning lasted 34 seconds. And then, on every screen at once, the words were replaced by a new sentence. You're already listening. And just below it, blinking slowly like a cursor waiting to be noticed, Population 5042, and growing. By the time the mirrors started to reflect things that weren't there, it was already too late for most people to pretend nothing was wrong. It began in subtle ways. A flash of movement that didn't match the person brushing their teeth. A delay between action and reflection. A face that turned too slowly, smiling when the original did not. At first, those who noticed chalked it up to exhaustion or tricks of the mind. Mirrors, after all, were just glass and silver. They didn't think. They didn't remember. They certainly didn't choose. But as September waned and October edged in, the glass began to forget its role. A teenage girl in Portland noticed her reflection wasn't wearing the same earrings she had on. Not mismatched, not forgotten, just wrong. Her hoops had become pearls. Her reflection smiled as she leaned closer to inspect. She hadn't been smiling. A week later, A man in Toronto found that his reflection would sometimes wait. He'd turn to grab his towel after a shower, and when he looked back, his mirror self would still be facing the other direction, still frozen. Sometimes it took a second or two to catch up. Sometimes it didn't catch up at all. But the worst weren't the mirrors that glitched. It was the ones that started to speak. It started in an apartment complex in Cincinnati, where tenants began hearing voices from their bathroom mirrors at 3:17 a.m. sharp. Not whispers, not creaks, actual, full-sentence voices, some friendly, some pleading, some angry, but all of them new names, full names. And not just of the tenants, but their families, co-workers, even pets. One resident recorded his mirror for a week. On the final night, the mirror said, "You're looking the wrong way." He turned. His bedroom was empty. But when he checked the footage the next morning, the mirror had shown someone standing behind him. Tall, pale, wearing his skin like a borrowed coat. He was found catatonic the next day, curled up under his kitchen table, whispering the same word over and over again like a rosary. Ridge. The news didn't report any of this. It couldn't. Every time a local station tried, the video would fail to broadcast. Files would corrupt. Live segments would freeze. Hosts would stutter, blinking hard like their tongues had forgotten what to do. One anchor in St. Louis broke protocol during a morning broadcast and tried to explain. She only got 3 words in. "Something is happening," before she screamed and began clawing at her own eyes. Her co-anchor swore he saw her reflection grinning even as she cried. The clip never aired again. Her segment was replaced with a feel-good puff piece about pumpkin patches. But those watching closely noticed something strange at the end. As the camera panned out, the window behind her desk reflected the studio. Only in that reflection, the anchor was still sitting there, bleeding and smiling. Back in the suburbs, mirrors started disappearing altogether. People were removing them, sledgehammering bathroom cabinets, smashing bedroom vanities, covering hallway mirrors with bed sheets and duct tape. But it didn't help. The voices didn't need glass. They just needed recognition. Once someone had heard them, once someone had believed, they found other ways in. A woman in Raleigh painted over every mirror in her house, only to wake up with words scrawled on her television screen in red. "You're still looking, even with your eyes closed." She never opened them again. Not even when the fire department broke down her door and found her curled in a closet, blindfolded, nails torn from her fingers. She had written something on the wall in blood and bone. Population 7,304. The handwriting wasn't hers. The threshold was crossed when the first child came back different. A 6-year-old girl named Lila had vanished for 37 minutes after walking into her school's bathroom. Security footage showed her entering alone. Then the hallway cameras flickered, and when they returned, she was walking back out, hands folded, eyes blank. She passed 3 staff members without acknowledging them. When her teacher asked her where she'd been, Leela smiled and said, "I was just practicing my smile with the other one. They thought it was a joke. A weird one, but nothing more." Until later that day, her mother noticed something strange. Leela no longer blinked, ever. Doctors checked. No paralysis, no damage. Just a perfectly functional child who simply did not blink. They filmed her for 4 hours. Not once. Then came the sleep studies. Electrodes. Observation rooms. But each time Lila slept, her eyes remained open, fixed on the one-way mirror used for monitoring. And inside that mirror, during the 3rd night, her reflection turned to look directly at the camera, even though Layla had not moved at all. When shown the footage the next morning, Leela tilted her head and said, "That wasn't me. That's the one who watches for when I'm tired." She smiled, a perfect, practiced smile. And later that week, she vanished again, this time for good, but her reflection remained. The mirror in her bedroom was shattered, but pieces of it still clung to the frame. Each shard showed her face, each one smiling differently. The number grew. It wasn't on a website or in an app, but people started seeing it anyway. On sticky notes they didn't remember writing, in chalk on sidewalks, on steamed-up car windows in the morning, POPU at IO 9441, then $10.3, and still climbing, and with every increase, the town became more real, not in one place, not on a map, but in all places, in empty rooms, in camera rolls, in the space between what your eyes see and what your mind filters out. Briar Ridge was no longer a location. It was a shape, a concept filling the negative space of fear. It lived in the mirrors, in forgotten names, in voices that started as yours and ended with something else. And now, everywhere people listened too closely, it began whispering one final promise. You don't have to come to us anymore. We're already inside. And they meant it. Because the mirrors had finally stopped lying. They showed exactly what you feared, and exactly what was watching you back. There came a night when sleep no longer meant silence. Not even the blank stillness of a dreamless drift could be trusted anymore. Those who closed their eyes began to wake with fragments they couldn't explain, memories they didn't own, dreams that didn't belong to them. Some remembered a town they'd never been to. Others saw themselves standing in doorways they swore didn't exist. The worst ones dreamt of mirrors, but not their own reflection, someone else's, something else's, smiling like it had been waiting for years. The psychiatrists called it a cognitive echo, a stress response, a cultural panic born from too much internet, too much imagination. But they were wrong. Because people weren't just thinking about Briar Ridge anymore. They were dreaming as if they'd already been there. Some even woke with dirt under their nails, with bruises shaped like handprints, with cuts they couldn't reach on their own. And some of them didn't wake up alone. Their thoughts had company. It started with a voice that answered before they spoke, a phrase that popped into their minds before they finished their own sentence. Sometimes it was nothing, a whisper mimicking their inner monologue, but slowly it started to change the words, shift their meanings, suggest better ones, sharper, colder, not theirs, like something was correcting them from the inside. A woman in Arizona, 29, wrote in her journal that she could no longer tell which memories belonged to her. I remember watching myself sleep, she wrote. I remember standing at the foot of my bed, but I don't remember getting there. She stopped writing after that. Days later, her apartment was found empty. Every book, every photo, every scrap of paper had been carefully sliced down the middle, as if someone had tried to split each word, each image, down to its most vulnerable part. On her bathroom mirror, in condensation she hadn't left, a message, no more thoughts. Only remembering. They called it cognitive imprinting in official circles. Quiet internal memos circulated among tech companies, schools, and government agencies. Nobody used the name Briar Ridge. Not directly. They danced around it, referred to it as the echo phenomenon, the thought leech, the reflection contagion, but they all knew what it was. The idea of Briar Ridge was starting to think for people. And worse, it was starting to remember for them. At a tech firm in Seattle, developers found their code being rewritten overnight. Functions they never typed. Syntax that wasn't human but still worked. They traced the commits to ghost accounts, users that didn't exist, IPs that looped back into their own network as if someone was inside the system. Not a hacker, not malware, something else, something thinking in languages no human ever wrote. The functions had names like air remember use and reflections leak and speak on sto stave. The developers laughed it off, until one of them, a man named Eli Croft, started hearing keyboard clicks in his sleep. He lived alone. The next morning, he found lines of code carved into the skin of his forearms. He didn't own a knife. It wasn't just mirrors anymore. It was language, speech, thought. People began forgetting words and replacing them with strange synonyms. Instead of home, they said hollow. Instead of family, they said the still ones. A boy in Florida asked his father, When do we get our second skin? Without even realizing it was strange. When asked to explain, he couldn't remember saying anything unusual. He was 6. By then, the numbers were rising faster than anyone could track. Populi 15th 188 Populi in 17th 6 and 1 Populataio 19,002 every time someone remembered the name. Even in a whisper, even just in a dream, Briar Ridge grew stronger. Not because they'd found it, but because it found them. It poured itself into the gaps in their memory, filled the soft, vulnerable folds of their minds, and whispered until they started whispering back. Not everyone disappeared. That was the trick. Some people stayed, but not as themselves. They went on talking, working, eating, looking exactly the same, but their thoughts were echoes, their words recycled. You could spot them if you really looked. The way they answered questions too quickly, how they blinked once every 6 seconds, precisely. The stillness in their hands, the absence of surprise. They didn't dream anymore. They didn't need to. Their dreams were already being used elsewhere. Then came the message, not whispered, not seen in a mirror, spoken, on live television, a children's show, PBS affiliate, Saturday morning. The puppet turned to the camera mid-song, paused, and in a completely different voice, flat, adult ancient, said thought is the first gate. You let us in when you named us. You keep us here when you think. The screen glitched, then returned to the program. Producers denied it, swore it wasn't scripted, claimed it was an editing error. But the damage was done, because 1,000 children had just heard it, and worse, they understood. That same week, 3 different first graders in 3 different states drew the exact same town on their math homework. Not similar, identical, same streets, same houses, same fountain, same red dress girl, and in the corner of each drawing a number Pulation 24998 and rising. Jonah Tell had disappeared weeks ago, but his voice still moved. Through videos, through recordings, through thoughts. It was quieter now, duller, like something that had been sanded smooth to fit more easily into the mind. You could hear it in the way people phrased things, the rhythm of their speech, the way they hesitated before saying their own names. One mother, desperate to get her daughter back, after she began referring to herself only as we, found an old cassette buried in the girl's dresser. She didn't remember owning a tape player, didn't recognize the handwriting that labeled it The Remum MBRNG Sida. She played it. Only once. And afterward, she never said her name again. She only listened and smiled, because now the thoughts weren't just being shared. They were being shaped, polished, worn, reused. The people who thought in echoes stopped being people. They became pages in a story that Briar Ridge had been writing since the first name was whispered too loud. And in the empty spaces where mirrors used to be, the reflections waited, not to mimic, but to become. Because soon, they wouldn't have to copy anymore. They would be the originals, and everyone else would just be remembering them wrong. By mid-October, entire neighborhoods began forgetting who they were, quietly, efficiently, as if memory itself had decided to excuse them. It never happened all at once. It came in fragments, slips of the tongue and gaps in timelines. People started forgetting street names, then birthdays, then the names of their children, their spouses. They'd stand in kitchens with puzzled looks, staring at family photos they couldn't place, murmuring things like, "I don't think this is where I live," or "That doesn't look like me." At first, doctors called it dissociative amnesia, triggered by collective stress or environmental trauma. But no one could explain how the affected all remembered the same thing instead, something none of them should have shared. A town, always the same one, always called Briar Ridge, except no 2 people could agree on where it was located. Some said New Hampshire. Others swore it was in upstate New York. A few whispered it used to be in the Pennsylvania woods, before it was flooded, buried, and forgotten. But none of them had ever been there. Not really. They had only remembered it, and that was all it needed. It was around this time that the rememberers arrived. No one called them that officially. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't knock on doors or hold meetings. They just appeared. In offices, in malls, in hospital waiting rooms, standing silently, always facing the largest reflective surface in the room. Sometimes it was a window, sometimes a computer screen. Once, even the gloss of a polished floor. They didn't speak. They didn't blink. They didn't move unless someone addressed them directly. But the moment someone did, even a simple "can I help you?" the rememberers turned. And they spoke. They didn't answer the question. They simply recited, line after line of details from the lives of the person who spoke. Things they hadn't told anyone. Things they hadn't remembered themselves. They'd say, "You buried your dog in the woods behind the house on Oak Ridge when you were 11, and you told no one." Or, "You think of your mother when you wash your hands, but you don't know why." Or, "You dreamed of the red house again last week, but you told yourself it was just a movie you saw once." They weren't threats. They weren't warnings. They were reminders. And every reminder made something inside the listener click. A memory that wasn't real, suddenly fitting like a lost puzzle piece. Some would weep. Others vomited. A few dropped dead on the spot, brains short-circuiting under the weight of conflicting timelines. Because the rememberers weren't from Briar Ridge. They were Briar Ridge, living extensions of a town that had grown too large for its own borders, that no longer needed soil or space, only hosts, and they weren't asking for you to come visit. They were telling you that part of you had already moved in. In Kansas, a middle school teacher named Clara Tells started keeping track of the patterns. She noticed students had stopped referring to themselves in the first person. Instead of "I did my homework," they'd say, "Homework was done through me." When she pressed them, they would blink, confused, unsure what she meant. She began cataloging phrases. Over 50 different students had used the expression "the quiet remembers," though none could explain what it meant. They'd shrug and say, "That's just what we say at home." Clara posted her findings to a private academic forum. The next day, every entry she'd written was gone, replaced with a single file, Ridge Notes of Final. Docs. She opened it. It contained only one sentence: "You don't need to track us. That's what we have you for." She resigned that night. She never left town again. Elsewhere, in places where reflections had long been shattered and words stripped of meaning, people began to exhibit the next stage: cognitive reassignment. They would sit for hours completely still while their families tried to shake them, speak to them, break the spell. Eventually, the person would whisper, "I am not who you remember." They were never violent, just eerily calm. They knew things they shouldn't, and they would insist, over and over again, that they were holding space for someone else, that they were keeping the memory warm. Hospitals refused to admit them. They weren't sick. Psych wards turned them away. They didn't scream, didn't hallucinate. They didn't even flinch when shown horrific images or videos. They simply said, "That is not for me to respond to. That's for the original." And when asked what that meant, they'd smile and tap their forehead and say, "This is not my first thought." The mirrors weren't necessary anymore. People could see reflections in anything now. Shadows on sidewalks, the sheen of spoons, even the eyes of loved ones. If the light caught them just right, and every so often the reflection wouldn't match, it would be off by just a second. Or blink when you didn't. Or smile when you didn't. And those who noticed were the next to disappear, not physically but in mind. Their thoughts rewired, rewritten. They'd forget what year it was, who the president was, what city they lived in. But they always remembered Briar Ridge. More vividly than their wedding day. More clearly than the face of their own child. Because the town had learned the most dangerous trick of all. It had learned how to prioritize. How to make itself the first thing you remember, and the last thing you ever forget. The sign changed again. Not physically, not in any real town, but people saw it anyway, in dreams. On receipts, on whiteboards in meeting rooms no one had touched. POPULI on 33039 and still growing, because now it wasn't just the curious, or the believers, or the unlucky. Now it was the rest of us. The tired. The distracted. The ones who forgot to look away in time. And somewhere, behind the thinnest part of the veil, the rememberers were taking notes. Not for themselves. For you. Because when the moment comes, and it will, you won't recall what your name was. Only that it was borrowed. And that something else has been wearing it longer than you think. By Halloween, people had stopped answering when their names were called. Not out of superstition, not out of fear, but because, deep down, some part of them had begun to suspect the voice calling them didn't belong to someone they knew. Maybe it was the subtle cadence shift, the awkward delay between the name and the question that followed. Maybe it was the way a sister's voice, or a mother's, echoed too clearly, like it came from a room with no furniture, no breath, no body. Names had lost weight. They had become bait. What most people hadn't realized yet. What the ones who disappeared too early never got the chance to tell. Was that Briar Ridge no longer needed you to speak your name. It only needed you to recognize it when it was spoken. Just the twitch of an ear, the shift of attention, the flinch of instinct. That was enough. That was permission. Because the name you carried wasn't entirely yours anymore. It had been borrowed, registered, filed. And when it was time to collect, the town didn't knock. It stepped inside. In a hospice center outside Albany, a woman named Grace Felder began speaking in her sleep. Nothing unusual at first, murmurs, fragments, memories. But then came names. Not of family. Not of friends. She whispered names no one in the room recognized. Strange, old-fashioned names that had no meaning in her life. Elijah Kroll, Marta Thistle, Roderick Stone. A nurse wrote them down. 2 days later, she found a leather-bound ledger in the center's lost and found. It was unmarked. No author. No publisher. Inside the same names. Pages and pages of them. Each neatly written, column by column. Beside a word in red ink returned, in a city council office in New Jersey, a clerk noticed the town database had started populating addresses that didn't exist. Homes with no land records. Streets that ended in cul-de-sacs, but now continued into dead zones that weren't part of the municipal grid. When he tried to remove them, the screen locked up, flashing a single alert: Ciano DEE Namums ein USE. He called IT. They didn't know what to make of it. The system was isolated, not connected to any external database. That night, he drove through the neighborhood and found one of the homes. New, immaculate, porch light on. No driveway, no mailbox, no car. Just a name carved into the sidewalk leading up to the door. His. He didn't go inside. But he never went home again either. The phenomenon no longer required belief. That was the most chilling part. It didn't care if you laughed at it, denied it, mocked it. Briar Ridge had outgrown myth. It had become infrastructural, woven into phone directories, school rosters, payroll systems. You'd sign in for a doctor's appointment, and the receptionist would pause. Did you move recently? Says here your primary is listed as Dr. Graves, 23 Hollow Street, Ridge. They'd squint. You'd shake your head, but you'd hear it, that subtle shift. Not Bridge, not Ridgefield, just Ridge, and that was enough. A hook set, a door unlocked. A name borrowed just long enough to let the rest through. Some tried changing their names. One man, a software engineer in Oregon, had his entire legal identity wiped. New birth certificate, new social, new signature. He spent 6 months off-grid, speaking to no one, writing nothing, thinking only in images. But it didn't matter. One night, he heard a knock at the door. 3 times. Then silence. When he checked his front steps, there was no one there. Just a letter, no address, no stamp. Sealed with a fingerprint. Inside a blank piece of paper. Until he tilted it toward the light. And his old name blood through the fibers, as if it had been written in his own shadow. He didn't make it through the night. The neighbors found every mirror in his home shattered inward, as if something had pushed through. The borrowed names began appearing on every type of surface: books, menus, receipts. You'd glance down at a soda can, and there it was. Not the name of your drink, your name, in that specific handwriting. The one you used when you were 12. The one you forgot. People panicked. But they didn't run, because you can't run from a place that exists in how you remember yourself. That's what Briar Ridge had become. Not a destination, not a town. A framework, a naming structure for what comes next. And the ones who had been taken, the ones who now stood still in grocery store aisles, smiling too long, blinking too slow, weren't hiding it anymore. They were proud. They wore their borrowed names like suits tailored from memory. You could always spot them by the way they introduced themselves. They didn't say, "Hi, I'm Dadamadon." They said, "This name has been chosen for me." And sometimes, if you were close enough, they'd lean in, whisper in your ear like a secret too old to keep hidden. "Do you remember yours? Or have we already taken it?" That same week, somewhere in Indiana, a new sign appeared overnight on a back road where no town should exist. Not painted, not posted, just there, as if it had always been there. It read, "A well ka Briar Ready G Popul Atio 51 423 PS Live LNAM ATT." No one remembered driving past it. But everyone who saw it, at some point, whispered their own name under their breath. Not on purpose, just out of instinct. And the sign, though motionless, listened. It was somewhere between forgetting and recognition that the gate fully opened. Not a gate made of iron or wood, but one woven from the soft, pliable fabric of identity itself. The kind of gate you don't see until it's behind you. The kind you walk through simply by remembering something the wrong way. It wasn't standing at the end of a road or nestled in the woods. It was in the way you answered the phone and hesitated for a second before saying your name. In the blank you left on that form because you couldn't remember if your middle initial was J or G. In the question you didn't ask because you were afraid you might not like the answer. That's where Briar Ridge waited. In those exact moments. And once it had enough of them, it no longer had to knock. It simply let itself in. The first official town records were uncovered by accident, buried in a microfiche archive in a courthouse that had burned down in 1971. The name appeared only once, in the margin of a zoning dispute, unconfirmed structure beyond designated barrier. See Briar Ridge boundary suggestion. There was no map, no outline, no further documents. But someone had drawn a small, perfect circle in red ink next to the note, as if to emphasize a location that couldn't be marked. A local historian named Harold Wexley found it. He was working on a book about ghost towns when he stumbled on the reference. And like so many before him, he followed the itch. Looked deeper. Searched property records, land surveys, census reports. Nothing. It was like someone had gone in and erased only Briar Ridge, but not cleanly. Just enough to make the shape of something missing. 3 weeks later, Harold was gone. Not reported missing. Just absent. His neighbors remembered him faintly, but when pressed, no one could recall where he lived. Not exactly. Some said the yellow house by the school. Others swore he lived 2 towns over. His editor found a manuscript on his desk, untouched and unedited. Titled simply, "Please leave a name at the gate." There were no chapters, just a list. Names, tens of thousands of them. Some scratched out, some circled. And every third page, the same phrase typed in small, steady font. "You remembered it wrong, so we took it back." The rememberers had grown more confident. They no longer stood still. Now they walked among crowds, in train stations, at bus stops. Their clothes were always too clean, too pressed. Their expressions eerily neutral. And the giveaway, the true mark, was how they answered if asked who they were. "I'm the name someone left behind." And then they'd look at you. Really look. not at your face, at your memory of it, and you'd feel it, that twitch, that lapse. That pause when you had to remember why you were even standing where you were. Why your hands were clenched. Why you suddenly couldn't recall your mother's voice or your own handwriting. And then it would smile. Because Briar Ridge didn't just take people. It took their place in the world, rewrote their edges, replaced their names. You didn't leave it. You just left yourself open. News anchors began slipping up on live broadcasts, calling themselves by names that weren't theirs. One man signed off as Malcolm Holloway when his name was Jeffrey Barnes. The correction never aired, because there was no record of a mistake. That night, all his socials updated to Malcolm Holloway. His emails changed. His nameplate at the studio the next morning had already been replaced. He didn't notice, because he remembered it that way now, and that was all it took. Across the country, more signs began appearing. Not physical ones, not all at once, but people started seeing them, at the edges of fields, on fogged-up windshields, in recurring dreams. Plesiliave gate. Most ignored them. Some wrote them down. A few obeyed. The act of giving up a name wasn't ritualistic. It wasn't theatrical. There was no summoning circle. No candlelight. It was far simpler. It was the girl in Utah who stared at the mirror too long and whispered, "I don't want to be her anymore." It was the man in Wisconsin who signed a form with a fake name and felt a strange relief he couldn't explain. It was the woman in Philadelphia who answered a spam call and, when asked, said, "This is not important." Each time it happened, the same thing followed. A stillness in the room, a faint buzz in the ears, and the sudden, chilling feeling that someone had just closed a door behind you. Even though you'd been alone, Briar Ridge had built its own census now. It didn't need a clerk. It didn't need approval. Every time someone released their grip on who they were, it was added. Not taken by force. Offered. Given freely. And the town grew, street by street, memory by memory, from nowhere to everywhere, no longer hidden in shadow, but nestled in suggestion. So when someone asked where it was, the only honest answer was behind your last forgotten thought. And when someone asked how to avoid it, there was only silence, because no one who could answer remembered what the question meant. They'd only smile, the way the red-dressed girl smiled from the fountain, the way your reflection sometimes does before you do, and the sign would change again, POPLATL on 58th 120 Namus Hale D74's Ellerton EWNTR Pen G, and in your chest you'd feel a tug, nothing dramatic, just the faintest pull, like your name had just been said somewhere far away, and part of you had already started turning toward it. It wasn't an event. It wasn't an explosion, a disaster, or an invasion. It was quieter than all of that, more invasive, more polite, the kind of catastrophe that asks for your consent without ever needing your answer. The kind that waits, not in doorways or dark corners, but in the pause between your thoughts. In the second you blink and forget what you were about to say. In the tug of uncertainty when someone calls your name and you hesitate just a beat too long before answering. That's when the pending begins. No alarms, no blaring omens. Just the slow realization that something you can't name has already filed the paperwork. That somewhere, Briar Ridge has begun preparing a space for you. Your name etched into a door. Your memories stacked like moving boxes, ready to be unpacked. A house assembled from your regrets, from your half-dreamed nightmares and idle thoughts you never voiced aloud. It has all been remembered for you, and all it needs now is confirmation. The first sign of confirmation comes not as a vision, but a feeling. For some, it begins as déjà vu, mild, familiar. A hallway that feels longer than it should. A street lamp that flickers in a way that makes you stop walking. A sound you thought you heard before you were born. The feeling that something just left the room a second before you entered it. For others, it's more direct. You're alone, folding laundry, and you hum a tune you swear you've never heard. but you know the words. You answer the phone, and there's nothing but breathing. But when you hang up, you realize your hand is shaking. Not from fear, but recognition. You wake in the middle of the night to find your bedroom rearranged. No items moved. No furniture touched. But everything feels like it's facing the wrong way. These are not hauntings. These are not dreams. These are preparations. Briar Ridge never builds haphazardly. It builds exactly, according to you. Some began to see it in crowds. Not the town itself, but signs of it. People standing too still at street corners. A child turning to look at you 3 times in a row without blinking. Reflections in puddles that show buildings not on your street. A stranger saying your name in a passing conversation, even though they weren't talking to you. Or so they claimed. And then, of course, the ones who knew. The ones who whispered, "It's pending," when asked how they were doing. The ones who smiled just a little too long when they said your name. The ones who didn't ask questions anymore, because questions required a memory of who you were, and their memory was now part of something else. At first, the population sign updated hourly. Then, it started updating in real time. No one could see it with their eyes, but if you listened, really listened, you could feel the number clicking forward, like a slow drumbeat inside your chest. A heartbeat that wasn't yours. A counter counting towards something. Every time someone gave up their name. Every time someone answered to a whisper that didn't come from this world. Every time someone said, "I don't remember," and meant it. Click. 58,121. Click. 58,122. Pending names hovered like dust motes, visible only in certain light. They gathered in corners, in the silence between elevator dings, in the breath held just before a knock. If you sat still long enough, you could feel one land on your skin. Not heavy, barely noticeable. But after that, things would shift. Not catastrophically, just slightly. You'd forget your locker combination, even though you've used it every day for years. You'd walk into a room and realize it wasn't yours, even though your keys opened the door. You'd look at your own handwriting and swear it belonged to someone else. These were not symptoms. These were signatures. Your paperwork was moving through the system. A man in Chicago tried to erase himself. He burned every document, deleted every photo, tattooed a different name on each arm, just in case he forgot which one was real. He spoke in third person only, refused mirrors, lived in silence. He made it 6 weeks, and then, one night, as he lay in bed with the lights off, he felt a gentle pressure on his chest, like something had just stamped him. He didn't open his eyes, but he knew. Pending completed. The next morning, neighbors swore they saw him walking his dog, waving like usual. But the man had no dog, and when they waved back, he didn't blink. He just smiled, and said nothing at all. It isn't about being taken anymore. It isn't about being lost. It's about being filed correctly. About having your pieces cataloged, indexed, and gently reassigned to where they always belonged. Because Briar Ridge does not kidnap, it clarifies. It doesn't pull you in. It waits for you to realize you never really left. The town's streets are paved with unfinished thoughts, built with the bricks of discarded names. Its houses are made from moments you misremembered. And its population, that's not just a number. It's a promise. A list of all the lives now properly reflected, properly archived, properly rewound. And the sign at the gate, for those still coming, still deciding, still resisting, reads NEWTRE pendin NAME PMAAAN steel WDUE PR your PLAC. And all around you, the world continues. Exactly as it should. Exactly as you remember it. Until one day you don't. And when someone asks your name, you'll pause, smile, and say, "I think it's being processed." By November, the changes weren't subtle anymore. People were finding entire rooms in their homes that hadn't been there the day before. A guest bedroom where there had been a wall. A basement door behind the refrigerator. Attics that stretched deeper than the structure could possibly allow. Some opened those doors and found nothing. Others found dustless furniture, beds that looked recently slept in, photos on the walls of themselves, but in clothes they never wore, standing beside people they'd never met. Everything familiar, yet fundamentally wrong. As if the house remembered a version of them they didn't recall being. A woman in Nova Scotia found a third-floor study in her century-old cottage. She lived alone, had done so for 12 years. Never had a study. No blueprints, no renovations. But there it was, oak bookshelves, a ticking grandfather clock, and a desk drawer filled with handwritten letters. Each one addressed to her from someone calling themselves the original. The letters were dated 2 decades into the future. In the last one, the writer warned her not to read further. She did. The next morning, she couldn't find her bedroom. Her house had turned. The doors led to the study. Every door. And every window showed only the inside of another room. No exit, no sky. Just herself in one form or another reading. Always reading. These were not hallucinations, not tricks of madness or stress. They were evidence of infrastructure quietly taking shape inside the world, around the world. Briar Ridge was no longer emerging in full. That was too obvious, too blunt. It was unfurling in fragments, implanting its architecture, one familiar detail at a time. You'd wake up to a coffee mug you didn't own, a coat hanging by the door in your size, in a color you'd never buy, a key on your ring that doesn't fit any door you've ever locked. It didn't matter whether you noticed or not. Noticing didn't stop it. It only confirmed you were still aware enough to know you'd soon forget. And that was the final step. Acceptance. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet version, the slow slide of surrender. The nod you give yourself when you see something in your home you can't explain and choose not to question it. That's when Briar Ridge stops pushing. That's when it starts decorating. Whole buildings began changing in plain sight. A hotel lobby in Montana disappeared overnight, replaced by a corridor of mismatched doors, each labeled with a handwritten nameplate. None of the guests were listed in the registry. None could be reached by phone, but one by one they returned to the lobby, each with a key, each with a new name. They checked out smiling. They left no luggage. An apartment complex in New York City started misdelivering mail to units that didn't exist. Unit 6BB10C, 13A, none of which had ever been built. But the mail kept coming. Handwritten letters, old photographs, flyers for a candlelight vigil on a street no one had heard of. One resident tried to track the mail back to its sender. The envelope contained a map. No towns. Just a circle, drawn in red. And below it, "Your room is ready." He moved out the next day. But 2 weeks later, his office mail was redirected to 13A Hollowview Terrace, Briar Ridge. He never questioned it again. There were reports of identical floor plans, spreading like blueprints seeded through reality. Hotels in different countries began to share the same wallpaper, the same cracks in the ceiling, the same creaking pipe in the third room on the left. One man walked into a boutique Airbnb in Belgium, only to realize it was the exact copy of the studio apartment he'd lived in 8 years ago in Cincinnati, including the dent in the wall where he'd thrown a coffee cup after a breakup. There was even the note he'd written and never sent. Still sealed, still in the drawer, addressed in handwriting that wasn't quite his own. All of it real. All of it waiting. Rooms never built now being inhabited, not by strangers. By versions of you that Briar Ridge had already prepared in advance. The phrase started circulating in whispered online spaces. If you find a room you didn't build, don't enter. But people did. Of course they did. Curiosity was the final tool Briar Ridge needed. Not the loud, reckless kind. The quiet kind. The sort that looks like caution at first. The kind of curiosity that whispers, "You should know what's behind that door, just in case." And when they opened the rooms, when they crossed the thresholds, nothing happened immediately. That was the trick. They just felt different. like something inside them had rearranged ever so slightly. Their handwriting changed. They laughed at things they used to hate. They dreamed in other people's voices. Not all at once, just enough to notice, just enough to ignore. New tenants showed up in cities where no new leases had been signed. Neighbors saw them come and go, but couldn't remember what they looked like. The names on the mailboxes were similar to theirs. Too similar. One letter arrived addressed to Eliza T. when her name was Elizabeth. She thought it a typo. The second came to E. Teller. The third original designate Eliza Tell, room 5. She didn't live in an apartment complex. She lived in a single family home. But the next time she left for work, she noticed her house had a hallway. And at the end of that hallway 5 doors. One slightly open, one with her name. Not the name she used. The one she forgot she had. The one Briar Ridge hadn't. The sign didn't update in the traditional way. It appeared, now, in interior spaces. In hotel guest books. In room service menus. On the screen of a smart fridge when the light flickered. Population and 72 Zalo 5 Aroms PR Parad 88th 9 and Ara 2 Doors Oren and Okid 1 just 1. Because only one person had seen it so far. But they wouldn't be the last. Because the rooms were ready. And the town had been so patient. You'd barely notice the paint on the walls was the color of your first bedroom. Or that the floor creaked in the same place where your childhood dog used to sleep. You'd walk in. Set down your coat. And wonder, for only a moment, if you were forgetting something. Then the door would close behind you. Gently. Gratefully. Because Briar Ridge doesn't need to pull you in anymore. It simply needs you to move in. It was subtle at first, easy to brush off. A passing comment from a coworker, "Didn't we talk about this yesterday?" A friend's confused expression when you told them about a movie you'd never seen, and they replied, "But you already told me what happens in the end." Then came the stranger who approached you in a bookstore, calling you by name, insisting you'd helped her last week, guided her through some town she couldn't remember the name of, said your voice was the same, said your smile was identical. You told her it wasn't you. She said, "I know. That's what the other you said too." And then she left. You didn't see her again. But the seed was planted. Someone had already been you, and they were doing a better job of it. People started noticing duplications, not physical clones, not sci-fi copies, but moments, mannerisms, decisions that felt too precise, too decided. You'd reach for a book, only to realize it was already open in your lap. You'd go to make a phone call, only to find the number already dialed. A word would rise in your throat just as someone said it aloud. Not a coincidence, not a prediction. A sync. A memory not formed in real time, but replayed. You were no longer living your choices. You were catching up to the script someone else had already written. And they were wearing your part better than you ever did. That's when the stories of the replacements began to surface. At first, just anonymous posts. Uncertain. Paranoid, I think someone's pretending to be me. But they're better at it. Not doppelgangers. Not imposters. Just versions. Like echoes made solid. They looked the same. Spoke the same. But people preferred them. They were warmer. Funnier. More present. They didn't forget birthdays. They didn't pause to find the right word. They didn't hesitate before answering the phone. And that was the difference. Because the original you still struggled. But the version from Briar Ridge, it had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times already. A woman in Dallas filed a restraining order against a person who matched her appearance down to the scar on her left elbow. But no record of that person existed. No social security number. No past addresses. And yet, 5 separate acquaintances insisted they'd spoken to this other her the week prior. That she'd helped them. Remembered details the real woman had forgotten. They didn't believe she wasn't the one they'd met. They preferred the version that wasn't real. After her case was dismissed, she disappeared from all public records. 2 months later, A woman matching her exact description was seen leading a town meeting in a recently erected structure just outside of Hollow Creek, Pennsylvania. The building had no foundation. The land didn't exist on any map, but the people in the room all wore name tags. Each one said "Welcome back." The term identity drift began appearing in secret psychological reports and redacted government memos, described not as a disorder, but a phenomenon of reallocation. It wasn't about forgetting who you were. It was about becoming the second draft. The first draft, you, was being shelved, rewritten. Somewhere behind a door you hadn't noticed before, the edited version of your life was being lived, polished, streamlined, accepted. One man described waking up to his own reflection watching him. Not staring back, watching. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror for 10 full minutes, and his reflection did nothing. No mimicry, just assessment. And then it smiled, not in malice, in approval. That was when he heard the lock on his front door click open, and someone, whistling the tune he'd only ever hummed inside his head, stepped inside. He fled that night, never returned. But later, his neighbors swore they saw him at the mailboxes the next morning. He waved. He smiled. He blended. They said he looked more confident than ever. It became clear then, Briar Ridge wasn't just growing, it was replacing, not all at once, but one memory at a time, one personality trait, one opinion, one moment where you say, "That doesn't feel like me," and laugh it off. But it's not a joke, it's a handover. A slow transfer of personhood, a handing over of the keys to someone who remembers how to be you better than you ever could. The mirrors didn't crack anymore. They stabilized, because they were no longer trying to match you. They were reflecting the preferred version, the version that belongs to the town now. Your face still stares back, but your eyes don't blink until after you do. Your smile comes a little too quickly, and when you ask yourself why you feel like a guest in your own life lately, you'll shrug. You'll move on. Because that's what the replacement would do, and the sign will flicker again. Somewhere, in a room you haven't walked into yet, where your picture hangs on the wall and your voice echoes through the air vents like it lives there now. Population 85 F10 Zemstin Rad Siagras 2 1984 Ora Gales Re Ovid Nantaba PLIBI because no one removes you. You're still there, watching. Trapped in the corners of your own reflection, mouthing the words you almost say. Trying to remember the last time you felt real in your own skin. And wondering, when did someone start being you better than you ever were? They didn't arrive like the rememberers. There were no reflections, no stillness, no flickering lights or unblinking stares. The archivist came quietly. They had no faces, no forms, not in any way that could be described. They weren't seen. They were noticed. A soft presence in the back of your thoughts. A slight resistance in your pen as you tried to write your signature. A hand resting gently on the shoulder of memory, not pushing, not erasing, just filing. They didn't take from you, they simply copied. But copies can be so convincing, can't they? You'd try to recall the day you graduated high school, and the memory would come crisp and vivid. But there'd be details that felt just slightly off. The weather too warm for the season, your mother standing where she shouldn't have been, someone clapping too early. You'd smile, but something inside you would hesitate. That hesitation, that pause, that's when they made the copy. That's when the archivist stepped in. People began to forget how they remembered things. Not the memory itself, but the order of it. You'd recall telling a friend a story, only for that friend to swear you were the one who was told. You'd insist you never owned a red bicycle, until someone showed you a photograph of you on it, smiling wide, a scrape fresh on your knee. And even then, you couldn't argue with the image. So you adjusted, you accepted the revised version. And somewhere, beyond the conscious mind, an archivist marked it as confirmed. It wasn't malice. It wasn't manipulation. It was curation. A better version of your history. Not true, but useful. Hospitals started reporting a strange anomaly in Alzheimer's patients. Those with advanced memory loss suddenly began speaking in perfect clarity, but only about one place, Briar Ridge. And not in confusion, not as a product of decay. They spoke confidently, described the library's oak shelves in detail, named streets that no GPS could locate. One woman, mute for years, sang an entire school anthem in a trembling voice, eyes fixed somewhere no one else could see. None of it matched any known record. But their voices carried certainty, and that's what the archivists needed most: conviction. It was through certainty that memories calcified, became facts, and facts, when repeated, became structure. Brick, wood, foundation. Briar Ridge didn't grow from land or laws. It grew from belief so steady it became geography, and the archivists were the builders. One therapist in Arizona, desperate to prove her patients' stories false, began taping their sessions. Over months, she collected hours of audio describing the same town from different people who had no connection to one another. Each person described not only the place, but the role they believed they played in it. The gravedigger, the school nurse, the man who fed the foxes near the fence that bordered the edge. One woman described a fire that broke out in the East End. Another recalled attending the memorial service for the ones who'd been lost in it. When the therapist cross-referenced the tapes, the timelines matched, events synced. And one night, when she reviewed the tapes alone, she heard her own voice on one of them. Not interviewing, remembering, describing the town, its winding streets, the names of the children, the feel of the stone path behind the bakery. She didn't remember saying any of it, but the voice was hers, calm, even, certain. The archivists had already filed her under resident. Not everyone was archived willingly. Some fought it, pushed back. But resistance didn't mean escape. It meant reclassification. Those who resisted became annotations, footnotes in other people's stories. You'd be standing in line at a store and overhear someone describing a strange dream, a town, a conversation with a figure who warned them not to stay too long. And when they described the figure, it sounded like you. Not exactly, but enough to make you pause. You were no longer the one having the dream. You were in the dream. A side note, a warning, a folded corner in someone else's memory book. You weren't forgotten, just reassigned. That's when the recordings began. Voicemails from numbers you didn't know, always static at first. Then your voice, not present you, some version of you. Speaking in a tone you didn't recognize, saying things you had no memory of. The west gate is closed now. They renamed the woods again. Don't follow the trail markers. We tried to burn it, but it won't stay gone. It remembers better than we do. You'd delete the voicemail, but it would return, on your laptop, in your dreams. You'd hear it when the radio lost signal, not a warning, not a threat, a documentation. The archivists don't care if you understand. They only care that it's written. Some said the archivists lived beneath the school, in rooms carved from stone and lined with shelves that had no end. Others claimed they didn't live anywhere, that they were the town. That every time you recalled something with certainty, you fed their system. That every time you forgot something small, they replaced it with approved content, a safer memory, a better narrative, a useful truth. And maybe that's why you can't remember your first kiss clearly anymore. Or your father's exact laugh. Or the smell of the house you grew up in. Because those moments didn't serve the version of you Briar Ridge needed. So they were archived, not deleted. Not erased, just shelved, waiting. The sign changed again, but not visibly. Now it was spoken, in whispers behind curtains, in phrases muttered during sleep, in interviews where subjects fell into trances and recited Piopuliao 91 447 R Shicha Ivid IDITES 104 2009 Rakia Adige Campiat, and then they'd blink, smile, ask, did I say something just now? They always ask, but it's too late. Because when the archivists speak through you, you don't feel possessed. You feel accurate. Like a well-edited book. Like a memory that finally makes sense. And the last thing you'll ever remember with full clarity is this: you were never the first draft. You were just the version still waiting for final approval. It began with the signatures. Not the big ones. Contracts, checks, official documents. Those were still yours, still recognizable. But it was the small ones that started changing. Scribbles on receipts. Notes left on the fridge. Birthday cards you didn't remember writing but were signed in your exact hand. Slightly neater. Straighter. Too precise. As if whoever had signed it was not only familiar with your signature, but better at it than you ever were. And in the moment you hesitated, held the pen above the paper, and couldn't quite recall whether you looped your lowercase d to the left or the right, they signed for you. The final approval wasn't dramatic. It didn't come in thunder or flame. It came in agreement. In letting go. You didn't fight them. You nodded. And the archivists wrote approved. People stopped correcting one another. That was the next sign. You'd say your birthday was the 14th. And someone would say, no, it's the 15th, remember. And you'd pause, because maybe they were right. Maybe you had remembered wrong. And the moment you allowed it, the moment you agreed, it locked in. You'd check your ID, and it would say the 15th. Your memories would shift to match. The candle count in your mind would recalibrate. And you'd find yourself defending it later, insisting it had always been the 15th. Not out of stubbornness. Out of certainty. That certainty was the signature the archivists were waiting for. And they were patient. They'd wait years if needed. Because every maybe you're right was a rubber stamp. Every I guess I forgot was a notarized confirmation. They didn't need to steal your life. They needed you to consent to the revision. And once you did, you became the footnote. They became the author. A man named Julian Kramer uploaded a video to a conspiracy forum titled, "You'll see the sign when it's already too late." In the video, he sits in his car, sweating, pale, eyes bloodshot. He holds up 2 driver's licenses, both with his photo, both issued by the same DMV, just days apart. One says Julian Henry Kramer, the other says Julian Howard Kramer. He insists only one is real. He doesn't know which. He says, "They won't let me decide anymore. When I say my name, they watch. When I hesitate, they write it down." The screen glitches. He looks up at the camera, like someone standing behind it. Then, quietly, "I think I've been finalized." The video ends abruptly. It's re-uploaded dozens of times, but no one can find Julian. And now, if you Google his name, a LinkedIn page appears. Neat, professional, with a new photo. It reads, Julian Kramer, Records Integration Specialist, Briar Ridge Office of Identity Confirmation. There's a contact form, but no one replies. Dreams began repeating. The same hallway, the same soft humming from behind a locked door. People started waking up with impressions on their skin, creases that resembled suit fabric, the faint indentation of reading glasses on the bridge of the nose. Not their own, not items they own, but impressions that spoke of someone else's sleep. Theories flooded private forums. The you theory that Briar Ridge doesn't steal you. It just completes you. Like a puzzle you didn't know you were missing pieces from. The finalization model that once your identity is approved, your original self steps aside, not erased, not harmed, just archived. And your refined version takes your place in the world. Better dressed, more articulate, never forgets appointments, answers texts on time, smiles a little too easily, and no one around you notices the difference, because that's the point. The finalized you is not some monster. It's everything you should have been, according to someone else's script. People stopped disappearing, not because it stopped happening, but because no one noticed they were gone. Their places were never left empty. They were filled, quickly and efficiently, by someone identical, but improved. A teacher who used to struggle with names now recalled every student by their third day. A father who forgot birthdays now planned surprise parties with eerie perfection. A woman who hated public speaking began giving spontaneous toasts at dinners she didn't organize. No one thought it strange. Why would they? She was just finally herself. The quiet fear settled in. What if I've already been finalized? You'd look in the mirror longer than usual, not searching for something wrong, just trying to catch up to the version of yourself that might already be living without you. You'd test your memories against old friends, try to trip yourself up, ask your sibling if you really broke your arm that summer in '96, or if they just remember it that way now. And when they answered with confidence you couldn't match, you'd feel it. That slow, creeping warmth of surrender. That calm. The kind that only comes from someone else taking care of the details. The finalized you doesn't argue. It doesn't need to. You gave them permission the day you stopped writing things down. The day you said, "You know me better than I know myself." And they agreed. In the offices beneath Briar Ridge, real or metaphorical, it doesn't matter anymore. The shelves are full now, row after row of neatly labeled boxes, each one marked with a number and a name, and inside each, not possessions, not documents, but discarded moments. The first version of your favorite joke, the note you wrote but never sent, the laugh you stopped using in your 20s, all of it stored, not for nostalgia, for record keeping, because someone else might need it, someone wearing your smile, living your cleaned up life, answering to your name, but with final approval. And so the sign changes again, not on a highway, not outside a gate, but within you. That soft stamp behind the eyes when you accept the timeline you didn't write. When your handwriting matches what the form expected. When the people around you nod and say, "There you are." That's better. And you say, "I feel like myself again." And you mean it. Because whoever's listening finally signs the form and files you under status finii zdbmr locate original archividide revian acc pidala and somewhere far away, or maybe right next to you, in the reflection that smiles too soon, someone whispers welcome home. You never feel it all at once. It starts small. A twitch in the corner of your eye when someone calls your name. A moment in the shower when you forget what temperature you prefer. The scent of unfamiliar soap in your own bathroom like someone else used it first. Then come the bruises, soft, symmetrical, like pressure from inside. Not painful. Just present, like fingers pressing gently against your bones from the wrong side. You tell yourself it's nothing. Maybe you slept wrong. Maybe your skin's just sensitive. Maybe you bumped into something you don't remember. But deep down, you know, it's not on you. It's in you. Something has settled under the surface. Something patient. Something permanent. Briar Ridge has stopped looking for ways in. It's already under your skin, and it's building up. Hospitals began reporting cases of phantom impressions. Not scars, not injuries, but topographical anomalies. People with raised lines along their arms and backs, forming what appeared to be street maps. Lab techs found themselves tracing them with fingertips out of instinct. Nurses whispered about matching patterns across patients who had never met. None of the medical scans showed foreign material. No implants, no tattoos, just skin folding where it never had before. In one case, a child's spine began to resemble a row of tiny windows, vertebrae curving into the outline of a house. His parents thought it was a birth defect, until he started describing the rooms in detail. Rooms he'd never seen, rooms that hadn't been built yet. He named colors, smells, floor creaks. And when his mother finally sketched what he described, the blueprint matched a house that would be listed for sale 4 months later. In Briar Ridge, a woman in Idaho swore she could feel hallways moving under her ribs. Not pain, just motion. A sliding sensation, like doors opening and closing. Like someone was walking through her lungs with purpose. At night, she heard creaks when she breathed. whispers when her heart beat faster. She went in for an MRI. The machine shorted out, not from power failure, from overload. Her scan didn't show a body, it showed a floor plan. The technician never spoke about what he saw, but he quit the same day. He now lives off-grid, though neighbors say they've seen blueprints tacked to his cabin walls. None of them local, none of them real. And at the center of each, a tiny, black house. No doors, no windows, just a name written beneath it, occupied. The skin maps weren't isolated. People across continents began to discover subtle architecture forming in their bodies, not mutations. Instructions. Tiny slits behind the ears that never healed. Freckles aligning into shapes. Road signs, streetlights, fences. A man in Spain found the outline of a porch etched into his calf overnight. It even had stairs. He swore he could feel people walking on it when he closed his eyes. He began to sleep standing up. Said it was the only way to keep the floor from collapsing beneath his dreams. He was last seen boarding a one-way train east, mumbling about needing to get to the foundation before it sets. He left behind a single message carved into his bedroom. Wall, the walls are inside now. Paint is memory. Language shifted too. People stopped saying I feel off today and started saying something's being built in me. It caught on. A TikTok trend at first. Phlebotomy, people showing off odd scars, unexplained bruises, stretch marks forming impossible symmetry. At first, it was a joke. Then the joke stopped being funny. The hashtag vanished. Accounts were wiped. Some of the people in those videos were seen again, months later, but different. Not wrong, just well structured. They stood straighter, spoke clearer, knew things they shouldn't. When asked about the videos, they'd smile and say, "That was before I had the attic installed." Or, "Oh, I hadn't been wallpapered yet." And if you pressed, they'd blink once, then whisper, "Do you want a floor plan too?" Skin isn't just skin anymore. It's real estate. It's a deed signed in dreams. Because Briar Ridge doesn't expand the way cities do. It doesn't grow from the earth. It grows from within. From memory, from name, from permission. Your childhood home. That favorite hiding place under the stairs. The smell of cedar and dust and something else you never could explain. That was the first construction. They logged it. Filed it. Stored the sensation of safety and shadow. Then they built around it. You didn't lose your body. You just leased it. Long ago? Without knowing. And now, it's being remodeled. You'll start to forget what your skin used to feel like. You'll wake up with a draft across your spine and realize it's not wind, it's a window. You'll cough and it'll echo. You'll taste brick in your mouth. You'll whisper a name into the mirror and your reflection will reply welcome to your corridor. Because the corridor leads inward now, and it never ends. The latest message wasn't spoken. It wasn't written. It appeared in the pulse, encoded into heartbeats, recognized only by those who had been fully restructured. It translated roughly to population 96, 401, expansion internal, you are the foundation. And the heart skipped once, not from fear, from completion. Because the town isn't over there anymore. It's here, behind your eyes, under your skin. Living room, kitchen, basement, memory, identity, bone. And when someone says you've changed, you'll nod, smile, and say, "I finally finished construction." They didn't mean to be difficult. They weren't rebels or prophets. They were ordinary people, teachers, baristas, janitors, postmen, who simply remembered the world differently, not dramatically, just slightly, enough to make conversation awkward, enough to raise eyebrows when they insisted a certain grocery store used to be across the street instead of where it stood now, enough to cause concern when they swore someone had died years ago, only to find that person alive and well with no memory of the event. They weren't sick. They weren't confused. Their minds were clean. Too clean. Like pages from a book that had never been rewritten. People who remembered things that the rest of the world had already corrected. And that made them dangerous. Because Briar Ridge has no patience for competing drafts. One of them was a man named Walter Knox, 63 years old, retired librarian. Never left his town except for one brief trip in 1989 to a place he could never quite locate again. He always called it the Ridge. Said it had the cleanest sidewalks he'd ever seen. Said the air there didn't smell like air. It smelled like paper and iron and something waiting. For years, no one believed him, until one afternoon, he walked into a local history seminar and began reciting facts about a neighboring town that no longer existed. Population, street names, founding dates, notable deaths. The crowd laughed, but a woman in the back began to cry, because she remembered it too. Her childhood best friend had lived there, and died there. Only now he hadn't. Now he was alive, married, 2 kids, living in a town with a different name. That's how the remembering wrong started to spread. Not like a virus, but like a rumor that turns out to be true. One person misremembered, and someone else confirmed the error. But it wasn't an error, was it? It was the original print. The draft before Briar Ridge had redacted it, archived it, replaced it. And now those memories were bleeding through. And Briar Ridge noticed. You could tell when someone had remembered wrong. Their dreams would become asymmetrical. They'd start repeating conversations that hadn't happened yet. They'd walk into rooms and get violently dizzy. Nosebleeds when passing open doors. Migraines when looking at old photographs. Some even tried to physically leave, to drive west or north or anywhere else. But the roads bent, the GPS glitched, and eventually the ones who insisted they were right were rewritten. Not deleted, just adjusted. Walter Knox was found 2 weeks later at a community center in a nearby town, happily teaching calligraphy. He didn't mention the ridge anymore, didn't remember his trip, but on his desk sat a single hand-drawn map. No labels, no compass, just a red circle at the center. And in careful cursive, "Do not remember this." Others weren't so easily folded back into the new draft. They fought to hold on to their version. A woman in Alberta nailed shut every window in her house, convinced the wind carried other people's memories. She spoke in riddles, recorded herself nightly, repeating the facts of her life. "My name is Tessa Jean. I was born March 12, 1985. I have never been to Briar Ridge. I have never approved an edit." By the 10th week, her voice on the tape had changed. The inflection, the pitch, subtle but different, like an actress playing herself. On the final tape, the voice was calm, steady. "I am Tessa Jean. I was born in Briar Ridge. I have approved this memory." Her home was found empty, clean. The only thing left was a photo album where her face appeared on every page. Even in group shots, she never belonged to. Then there were the ones who remembered too much. Not wrong, not inaccurate, just unapproved. Events no one else recalled. Locations with no record. Names spoken that triggered nosebleeds in listeners. These people began drawing spirals on walls, whispering about a library where none of the books had titles. They spoke of a man with no eyes who walked backward through mirrors. Of a staircase that led to a childhood you never had. They weren't mad. They were unedited. And they were hunted, not by people, but by things wearing their loved ones' voices. These things didn't scream. They didn't threaten. They simply asked, "Are you sure?" Again and again, until doubt settled in like mold. Because once you're unsure, the rewriting begins. And no one fights for a draft they don't trust anymore. There was a theory, a soft, whispered one, that Briar Ridge didn't need to erase you if you remembered wrong. It just needed to outvote you. Flood reality with enough corrected versions until the original became a glitch, an embarrassment, a relic no one wanted to carry. And then, you'd simply dissolve into the footnotes, not gone, just non-canonical. Eventually, those who remembered wrong went quiet. Some took vows of silence, fearing their voice might be used against them. Others vanished into small towns, hiding in memories too obscure to rewrite, but a few chose a third path. They wrote everything down, manuscripts, journals, blog posts on servers long since buried. They flooded the margins with messy, unfiltered recollections. Because they believed something simple, but terrifying, that memory, when shared, creates mass, and mass is hard to move, hard to rewrite, hard to erase. The current population of Briar Ridge, no one can say for sure anymore. Not because it isn't counted, but because the counters are being replaced. They blink more than they used to. They smile at odd times. And when you ask them, is this how it's always been? They always nod, always. And then they ask you, are you sure? Because if you're not, the town knows. And it starts preparing your edits, one memory at a time, until your version of the truth is just another typo in someone else's story. It didn't start with noise. It started with the absence of it. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, but pressurized. You'd be in the middle of a conversation, and suddenly the world would fall quiet. Not just the room, but everything. No birds, no wind, no distant hum of traffic. Even the fluorescent lights would hold their breath. You'd pause mid-sentence, uncertain whether you'd actually spoken or only thought the words. Then, behind your silence, you'd feel the weight of someone else listening. Not from the outside, from inside the quiet. That was the threshold. Not a place, a moment, a zone. And once you crossed it, Briar Ridge began to hear you differently. It didn't just listen to what you said. It listened to what you didn't. Children crossed it first, naturally, easily. They would stop mid-play, tilt their heads, and stare at corners like they were waiting for a response. They'd begin holding pretend conversations with the listener, a figure none of them could describe, but all of them agreed lived in the pauses. Parents laughed at first, called it a phase. But then came the drawings, pages filled with black squares, and inside each square, a single word. Words they hadn't spoken aloud, fears no one had told them, memories they had never lived. When questioned, the children would shrug. He already knows, they'd say, as if the listener had already recorded their silence and filed it away. And when the drawings were destroyed, more appeared. Inside shoes, beneath beds, under tongues, folded inside the silence that pressed against their skulls like a ceiling slowly lowering. Adults weren't immune. They just needed help crossing over. Sometimes it was an argument left unresolved, a text you typed and deleted, the sudden realization that your home was too quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. Silence used to be a blank space. Now it was a listening room, and when you entered it, consciously or not, you felt it. A sharpness behind your ears, a pressure on your jaw, the urge to swallow. But your throat already knew there was nothing left to move, because the listener doesn't need words, only hesitation. And once you hesitate, it records. People started going missing in quiet places, not loud, bustling spaces, but in hallways between rooms. In the time between 3:07 and 3:08 a.m., inside walk-in closets where they'd gone to find something real quick. Gone. No struggle, no scream, just silence. And the echo of a final breath that didn't finish. Security footage was reviewed. Most of the time, it glitched. But on the rare occasions it worked, the result was worse. The missing person would appear to simply fade out, not disappear instantly. That would have made sense. They would stand perfectly still for several seconds, staring off screen. Then their outline would blur, their body would smudge like ink, and then nothing, just an empty room, and a faint hissing sound, like a microphone picking up a sigh from a mile away. Phone calls changed. Sometimes you'd answer and hear nothing, just dead air. But if you listened long enough, the silence answered back, not with words, but with mirrored quiet. You'd exhale, and hear the exact same breath return to you. Half a second late, you'd clear your throat, and the silence would do the same. And if you ever dared whisper something real, something true, something you'd never told anyone, the line would click. And on the other end, your own voice would whisper back, I heard you. Then the call would drop. But the silence would stay. Inside the walls. Under your bed. In the gap between blinks, waiting. One man built a soundproof room. Padded walls. No windows. Multiple locks. He'd read the reports. Seen the patterns. He believed if he could make enough noise, white noise, music, static, he could drown out the listener. He went in with speakers blasting static at full volume. He stayed for 13 hours. When he emerged, he was smiling. Too widely. He handed his assistant a slip of paper. One sentence written in red ink, "It's not the silence that listens." Then he sat down and never spoke again. Not once. Not even as he was committed. And when his vitals were taken each morning, his heartbeat was perfectly in sync with the ticking of the wall clock, down to the millisecond. The town of Briar Ridge, they say, has no birds, not because they fled, because birds sing, and song masks the threshold. But humans, we pause, we second guess, we fall silent in elevators, in the middle of confessions, during nightmares we refuse to finish describing, and the listener waits there. Not to judge, not to punish, only to record. Because once recorded, silence becomes structure. And every breath you held becomes a brick. Every unsaid word becomes a beam. Every regret becomes insulation. And Briar Ridge grows taller, wider, fuller. Inside your stillness, there's a sound now, underneath everything. A tone you can't quite hear unless the world goes still. Some say it's a frequency. Others say it's breathing. But the truth is worse, it's typing. A soft clacking rhythm inside your skull. Cataloging everything you never said. Building your room, word by word. Preparing your final, silent confession. And when your moment comes, when your voice finally fails and your thoughts go quiet, it won't feel like death. It will feel like approval. A final click, a door closing. And the listener will nod, because you've crossed the threshold. And your silence has finally been added to the blueprint of Briar Ridge. Population 101 998 recent additions hereditary construction status aliud di final awards. And somewhere in your empty room, a pen lifts itself and waits. They were warned. In dreams, in static, in the echo of their own voices ricocheting off empty rooms, they were warned. But they didn't stop. These were the ones who couldn't leave well enough alone, who poked at the seams of their lives until they unraveled. Podcasters, researchers, conspiracy junkies, and self-styled investigators. They weren't content with silence or suggestion. They needed proof, something they could record, something they could broadcast. They thought the more they spoke, the more control they'd have. That if they filled the air with enough noise, it would block out whatever was creeping in. But they forgot the most important rule of Briar Ridge. It only needs you to speak once. After that, it owns your voice. It started with a radio host out of Milwaukee, midnight talk show. He'd built a cult following by covering strange phenomena, local hauntings, and government cover-ups. He was respected, in that niche way people respect those who aren't quite right, but might be close enough. His name was Ron Dempsey. No criminal record, liked bourbon and jazz, and had a voice that could calm hurricanes. He aired a special one night, titled The Town That Answers Back. Said it had come from an anonymous tip, something about a place that didn't exist on any map, but had perfect zoning. He laughed through the first half of the show, made jokes about ghost city planning committees, and haunted neighborhood watch groups. But somewhere after the second ad break, his tone changed. He stopped reading his script. He started listening. There was a moment, about 2:17 a.m., where Ron paused mid-sentence, dead air for 6 full seconds. Then, he leaned into the mic and said quietly, "I don't remember writing this part." After that, the rest of the broadcast was spoken in a voice not quite his. It was similar, same timbre, same cadence, but the rhythm was wrong, like someone trying too hard to sound human. That voice listed names, streets, events, approved edits, it called them. Then it whispered a phrase so softly it almost went unheard. "It's done. He's done. We've got his frequency now." The broadcast cut to static. Ron never aired another show. His studio was found untouched, equipment still warm, coffee half drunk. Only one item was out of place, a reel-to-reel recorder playing nothing, looping endlessly. Except when reversed. It repeated one sentence: "We don't need your words. Just your need to speak." After that, others followed. YouTubers making exposés about Briar Ridge started glitching mid-video. Sentences would loop, their faces would flicker, and their mouths would move in ways their voices didn't match. Audiences assumed it was editing or a bad internet connection, until the channels started uploading by themselves. Unscheduled, untitled. Hours of nothing but quiet breathing and the occasional knock, always from somewhere far behind the camera. And if you turned up the volume loud enough, you'd hear it. Every few minutes, just under the threshold, listening, recording, replacing. Eventually, the content creators stopped posting altogether, but their channels kept growing. Subscribers climbing by the thousands, videos appearing out of thin air. People commenting with timestamps they couldn't remember watching. Some of those commenters were later found wandering abandoned places. Cell phones filming, mouths moving silently, eyes unfocused, searching for a better signal. Not for Wi-Fi, for return access. Because Briar Ridge doesn't just listen to your voice, it replays it. Again and again, until it's louder than you are. There was a therapist who tried to break the pattern. She ran sessions with affected people and forbade recording devices. Paper only, no speaking during key parts. She thought if she could reduce the vocal memory, she could starve the signal. For weeks, her notes were promising. Her patients described the presence of echoes, but claimed they felt thinner, less aggressive. Some even regained memories they thought were overwritten. Then, during one session, a patient began humming, a tune the therapist didn't recognize. She asked what it was. The patient smiled and said, "It's what the town sounds like when it's breathing in." The next day, the therapist lost her voice. Not from illness, not from injury. Her vocal cords were medically intact, but when she opened her mouth, only other people's voices came out. Fragments from past sessions. A child's giggle. An old man's scream. Her own voice never returned. Now she writes everything down, and every few months, her journals start filling in on their own. As if her silence is still speaking somewhere else. It became clear, eventually, that Briar Ridge didn't need people to spread the word in the traditional sense. It just needed enough people to try, to speak it into the air, to share their theories, their warnings, their confessions. Every podcast, every voicemail, every whispered name in the dark, they were offerings, verbal agreements, audio consent forms, because the moment the name leaves your lips, it becomes licensed content, owned, filed. Used to build the next wing of the town inside someone else, maybe a stranger, maybe your future self. And when people say, "I swear I've heard that voice before," they have. Because your voice now lives in the town, waiting to be played again, and again, and again, until it's louder than your heartbeat, until it's the only sound left in the world when all others go quiet. Population updates became spoken now, not written. You'd hear them in TV static between elevator chimes, whispered into the wear of bathroom fans. Somewhere, someone would say 105,210, then silence. Then your voice has been added, and you'd laugh, shake your head, chalk it up to sleep deprivation. But that night, when you speak in your dreams, your voice will sound a little different. Clearer, sharper. Like it's already been edited for broadcast. And if you wake up to the sound of yourself calling your own name from the hallway, don't answer. Don't speak. Don't even whisper. Because once you do, you've joined the town choir, and Briar Ridge never loses its voices. It didn't have a mailbox, no porch, no address. It was just there, wedged between two buildings that hadn't been there the day before, on a street no one remembered walking down. You didn't find it because you were looking for it. You found it because it wanted to be found. People who passed by swore they felt pulled toward it, like something in the pit of their stomach whispered, "You've left something inside." And even though they'd never seen the house before, never lived there, never so much as dreamed of it, they believed it. And that belief was enough to open the door. The house didn't creak. It didn't groan. It welcomed. It recognized you before you recognized it. And if you crossed the threshold, you were no longer a guest. You were inventory. The interior didn't follow logic. Rooms changed size depending on how you felt. Walls curved inward when you hesitated, stretched outward when you lied. It smelled like old pages and forgotten lullabies. Some rooms looked like places you'd only seen in passing. A motel bathroom from a road trip you barely remembered. A childhood bedroom that had burned down decades ago. A waiting room you sat in once when your father got his diagnosis. The house didn't copy them. It claimed them. Everything inside it was built from what you'd left behind. Every moment you didn't mourn properly. Every memory you rushed through. Every secret you whispered only once. Now physical. Now part of the floor plan. One woman, Marcy Dendrick, 42, childless, never married, stepped into the house and recognized the smell of her mother's perfume, despite her mother having died when she was 8. She followed the scent through a series of hallways that kept looping back on themselves, each pass showing older versions of herself in the wallpaper. First a teen, then a young adult, then someone who looked exactly like her mother. Eventually, she found a nursery. Inside was a crib, and in that crib was a blanket she'd never seen before, embroidered with a name she never gave to a child, Elena. When she turned to leave, the door had vanished. But the walls whispered, "It's okay. You live here now." She hasn't been seen since, but the window above that room glows at exactly 3:13 a.m. every morning. And if you listen closely, you can hear humming, off-key, but content. Authorities tried to demolish the house once. A construction team arrived with permits, machines, and no patience for superstition. The moment the bulldozer touched the outer wall, the engine shut off. The driver refused to speak afterward. He just handed his helmet to his supervisor, walked away barefoot, and was later found muttering in an alley 6 blocks over. All he said was, "You can't knock down what remembers itself." The house remained, and by the following week, it had gained a second floor. No one saw it happen. It just was. Neighbors started noticing changes in their own homes. A closet that used to lead to the attic now opened into a staircase that descended further than the house should allow. Mirrors began showing rooms that didn't exist behind them, places with high ceilings, no exits, and too many chairs. A family reported hearing footsteps above their bedroom, despite living in a single-story home. When they went to investigate, they found a new door. Inside was a dining room, fully set for 6. The plates were warm, the food was fresh. The chairs were all occupied by blurred figures nodding slowly. One of the children whispered, "I know them." When asked who they were, she replied, "The people we never became." Experts, those who still dared to call themselves that, began theorizing that the house wasn't built. It was grown. From memory, from grief, from the things people never said out loud. Every regret, every near miss, every could have been, it had weight. And that weight needed a place to live. Briar Ridge offered it shelter. And the house, it became the host, a living archive of unlived lives. A structure built from timelines that split and curled inward like the spiral of a conch shell, echoing back only the echoes themselves. A journalist, intent on uncovering the truth, broke in with a body cam and a live stream. Thousands watched as she moved through rooms that changed around her, childhood bedrooms, giving way to conference rooms she swore she'd seen in dreams. Then the stream cut to black. Audio continued for a few seconds. Footsteps, breathing. Then, her voice, "I see myself." Pause. "I see the version of me that stayed, that said yes, that didn't walk away." sobs, not fear, grief. Then, quiet. The stream never resumed. But a week later, viewers found a new channel using her name. Only one video, her sitting calmly in an unfamiliar kitchen. Behind her, the house visible through the window. She smiles, waves, and says, "Come home, we've made space." The video ends. But subscribers keep receiving daily notifications. Same title every time you've lived here before. You don't find the house by searching for it. You find it by remembering something you never did. By standing too long in a room and feeling like someone else has already decorated it. By looking at your own reflection and wondering why the face staring back seems so comfortable here. And when the house finds you, you'll feel it in your bones. The hum through your floorboards. The softness in your pillow that doesn't belong to your shape. The sudden sense of nostalgia for rooms that never existed. And somewhere deep within Briar Ridge, the house shifts again. Welcoming, adjusting, expanding. Because someone somewhere just sighed and whispered, "I wish I'd stayed." And the house smiles, because now they will. They arrived without fanfare, no thunderclap, no courier. Just a plain envelope, white, no stamp, no handwriting, appearing exactly where it shouldn't have. On your kitchen table, even though the door was locked. On your pillow, though you hadn't left the room. Under your windshield wiper after a heavy storm, dry as bone. You didn't ask for it. You didn't open it right away, but eventually you did. Because curiosity always outweighs caution. And inside, you found exactly 3 things: a hand-drawn map, a list of actions to take, numbered but out of order, and a final line at the bottom. Written in the neatest, most familiar handwriting you'd ever seen. You've done this before. The first map was crude. Just lines and circles, symbols and scratches. But something about it made sense. It didn't show roads or landmarks you recognized, but you felt them. You could point to a corner and say, "That's where I kissed her goodbye," even if you didn't know who her was. You could trace a curve and remember pain in your ribs. The map wasn't a place. It was a sequence of feelings. A blueprint of emotional topography. The second item, the instructions, seemed random at first. Turn off the hallway light at 2:14 a.m. Whistle only while descending stairs. Do not answer if the door knocks twice. Only once, or 3 times. Leave a glass of water in the freezer, but never drink it. Do not speak in mirrors after sunset. Some were easy to ignore. Others itched at you. Not because they made sense, but because you already wanted to do them. That's when the understanding began to set in. These weren't instructions. They were reminders of something you used to follow, of something you once agreed to, long before you knew the cost. Across Briar Ridge, others began receiving their own envelopes, each unique, each tailored. But the themes were the same: maps made of emotion, instructions that hinted at patterns. The recipients called themselves the guided. They met in secret, compared notes, drew overlapping diagrams of actions and consequences. They believed they were being given a chance to escape, or perhaps a second chance to get it right. One man followed his list to the letter for 31 days. On the final night, he vanished. Only his clothes remained, neatly folded on his bed. But his house had grown a hallway that didn't exist before. Inside it hung framed versions of his list, glowing faintly. Each line now had a check mark beside it. And beneath the last, correction approved. Memory cleared. Not everyone followed the lists. Some burned them, tore them apart, ignored them outright. Those people changed, subtly at first, misplacing words, repeating actions, standing in doorways a beat too long, as if waiting for an unseen signal. Then came the real distortions, laughing at things no one said, answering questions before they were asked, reaching for objects they couldn't possibly see. One woman who refused the instructions eventually began receiving new ones. Not on paper, but whispered through her dreams. She screamed the first time she heard them, not out of fear, out of recognition. "I used to give these instructions," she whispered. I was the one who wrote them down. No one believed her. Until her handwriting started appearing in other people's envelopes. The town's official stance was silence. City officials dismissed the envelopes as an elaborate prank. But surveillance footage showed something else. On the nights new envelopes appeared, the town's lights would flicker in perfect sequence, like a ripple across a dark sea. Street lamps dimming and brightening as if breathing, entire neighborhoods pulsing in rhythm, as if acknowledging receipt. And after each wave, more buildings appeared, not constructed, just there, with front doors that already bore your fingerprints, with pantries stocked with your preferred cereal, even if you hadn't eaten it in years, with framed photos you didn't remember taking, but couldn't deny. The instructions weren't building the town, they were building you into it. Eventually, some began leaving notes of their own, trying to reverse the signal, to give instructions back, but the town didn't respond to those, or rather, it refused them. One woman etched her counter list into her walls. 3 days later, her house rearranged itself. The bathroom became a closet. The front door led to a stairwell. The kitchen disappeared entirely. The final change was most unsettling. Her own handwriting vanished from every surface, replaced by a cleaner, calmer version. Same words, different tone. At the bottom, a new line appeared: "Thank you for the revision." She no longer speaks, but her neighbors report hearing her type through the walls all night long. Rhythmic, purposeful, as if she's taking dictation from a voice no one else can hear. A theory emerged, among the guided and the forgotten alike, that the instructions weren't for escape or survival, they were protocols for integration. Steps not to flee Briar Ridge, but to settle in properly. To merge the body and the memory, to fold the self into the growing structure. Because once you complete the list, once the final box is checked, you're not done. You're uploaded, committed, written into the foundation. The lists don't free you, they finish you. The final instruction on every envelope reads differently. Some say do not blink during the knock. Others forget what you never lost. But they all end with the same timestamp, 3:16 a.m. And when that time arrives, everything stops. Traffic lights freeze. Dogs fall silent. Clocks pause between ticks. And if you're awake, you'll hear it. The sound of ink drying somewhere in your house. The confirmation that your story, your version, has just been finalized. And after that, you'll receive no more envelopes. Because now, you are the instructions. And someone else will find you on a folded page, listed as step 4, let them in. It always started with the streetlight, just one, flickering. Not in the usual stutter of faulty wiring, but in a slow, deliberate rhythm, like breathing. You'd pass it on your way home and think nothing of it. Maybe you'd glance up. Maybe you'd pause for a second and think, was that light always there? But you'd keep walking. You always did. The next night, it would flicker again. Maybe a little closer to your front door this time. And the night after that, another one just like it, further down the block, mimicking the first. You tell yourself it's a coincidence, that the city's been replacing bulbs, that infrastructure is failing, but that's not what's happening. Because it's not the lights that are moving, it's the street, and it's following you home. At first, the changes were subtle. A sidewalk you didn't remember now paved. A fire hydrant in front of your neighbor's house that hadn't been there the day before. A trash can placed just slightly too neatly on the curb. Then came the signs. Actual signs, not road signs, names. Posts hammered into grass overnight, written in a font you couldn't place. Sometimes in English, sometimes not. Benton Way, one read. Another Marrowbend Crescent, and beneath the names, always the same inscription, established pending. Neighbors began asking questions, but not the right ones. They noticed the same things, but no one wanted to admit what it felt like. Like the street was watching, trying to blend in, dressing itself in details stolen from elsewhere. A lawn ornament here, a bike rack there. A swing set identical to one 2 towns over, down to the chipped red paint and crooked bolt. Everything eerily familiar. Everything just slightly wrong. One woman, Carla Hennings, kept a journal of the changes. Every time a new piece of Briar Ridge appeared on her block, she recorded it. She took photos, printed them, compared angles. It was her obsession. Her neighbors mocked her at first, called her paranoid, until she went missing. Not in a dramatic way, no screaming, no broken windows. She was just absent. But her house, it had changed. The door was now slightly recessed, with a knocker shaped like a hand instead of the brass ring she'd always had. The windows were longer, narrower, and most unsettling of all, the mailbox now read 3000 Marrowbend Crescent. There was no crescent, not on any map, but that didn't matter, because the street had decided to establish itself. And Carla's home was the first successful integration. People began waking up to find their front yards altered, driveways extended, fences slightly rotated, entire trees replaced with perfectly symmetrical lookalikes. Some even heard sounds at night, construction noises, soft hammering, the whisper, slap of blueprints being unfurled, but when they checked, there was no one outside, no workers, no trucks, just the faint smell of new pavement. Some tried to move. They packed. They listed their homes. But no matter how far they went, a familiar flickering streetlight would eventually appear, on a corner that hadn't existed before, with a road sign bearing the name of the place they left, only slightly different. Benton Way, Marrowbend Crescent. It didn't matter. The street remembered them, and it was coming to reattach. One couple fled across state lines, rented a cabin deep in the woods. No neighbors, no roads. They thought they'd escaped it. Until one night, the wife stepped out for air and found a freshly paved sidewalk curving behind the trees. She followed it. It went nowhere, until it didn't. At the end of the path was a lamppost, quietly humming, and at its base, a child's chalk drawing their old house. Right down to the flower box she'd torn down years ago. She ran back inside, shaking. Her husband didn't believe her. But when he went out to prove her wrong, the sidewalk was longer. And this time, there were 2 chalk drawings, both labeled Future Home Site. It's not just geography. The street doesn't just follow. It rewrites. People began receiving mail for addresses that weren't theirs. Bills from the city of Briar Ridge. Notices of zoning changes. Even invites to neighborhood association meetings with agendas titled Phase Completion Updates and Resident Normalization Protocols. Some thought it was a prank, but those who attended the meetings, out of curiosity or by compulsion, never came back the same. They'd talk differently, move differently, refer to their homes by block designation, not address. They'd start planting hedges in the middle of the night, or repainting their doors to match the others. When asked why, they'd smile and say, "We want the street to feel comfortable here," as if the asphalt had preferences, as if the pavement could punish misalignment. Then came the cracking, not in the roads, but in time. People began reporting deja vu loops, walking the same few blocks and ending where they started, despite turning corners. Street names that swapped overnight. Garbage bins placed precisely where you'd tripped as a child. The town wasn't just expanding. It was remembering you, piece by piece, block by block. You weren't living on a street anymore. You were living inside its memory. And the longer you stayed, the more you adapted. The more your thoughts aligned with its grid. The more your dreams matched its zoning diagrams. Until one day, you'd wake up and say something strange to yourself in the mirror. "I think the cull, Sack wants me to stay." And the mirror would fog with breath. Not yours. Today, they say Briar Ridge is everywhere. Not all at once, just inching. Like a curb creeping into your neighborhood. Like a stop sign appearing where it wasn't last week. Like your phone's GPS redirecting you slightly. Never back the way you came, always just a block deeper. Always into another curve of the map you don't recall agreeing to. And if you ever see your street name change, even by one letter, if you ever see a flickering lamp post where none belonged, if you ever feel your sidewalk curve in a way it never used to, then it's already begun. The street has followed you home, and it's laying foundations inside you now, because Briar Ridge doesn't just grow, it multiplies. One block at a time, one breath at a time, one rewritten address at a time, and the final line etched beneath the newest sign, Resident U. They showed up first in yearbooks, smiling faces no one recalled seeing in the hallways, names unfamiliar to students, but perfectly alphabetized. At first, people assumed it was a printing error, maybe a recycled template from another school. But then one teacher, a lifer at Briar Ridge Elementary, dug through her collection of class photos. And there they were, every year, at the edges, always at the edge, half, smiling, eyes a little too focused, postures too still. They weren't background noise. They were anchored there, like place holders that had finally taken shape. She tried to match names to records, but none existed. No transcripts, no report cards, no emergency contacts. And yet, the lockers had stickers. The desks had pencil grooves with initials. The books had dog-eared pages marked with thoughts written in a cramped, neat hand. And the worst part, they weren't blank entries. They were familiar. Faintly. Like a dream you never finished having. Like a friendship you think you lost but can't quite recall. A boy named Trent Hatherley was the first to speak up. Quiet kid, kept to himself. Until one day, he raised his hand and asked the teacher why no one said hello to the girl sitting next to him. The class turned and looked. There was no one there. The seat was empty. But Trent insisted calmly that her name was Mira, that she had freckles, and that she always erased her answers halfway through a test, even if they were right. The teacher told him to stop playing games. He cried, not out of embarrassment, but frustration. And when the bell rang and the children rushed out, she saw something that made her stomach twist on the desk where no one sat, a small eraser. Pink, worn thin, carved into it. Faint and uneven mire, it wasn't there the day before. She was sure of it, or she had thought she was. Over time, more children spoke of their forgotten classmates. Some described them as quiet friends. Others called them echo kids. Always present, never loud. Easy to miss. Easier to forget. They would appear in games where someone always had to be it, yet no one could remember choosing them. They'd be partners in class projects, only to vanish when the grades came in. But every so often, a paper would be found in perfect cursive, unsigned, ungraded, sitting just outside the stack. One student claimed that if you sat on the far end of the cafeteria, near the emergency exit, you could hear them, talking, but not to you, to each other. They spoke like memories talking to other memories, reconstructing themselves, trying to remember why they were ever forgotten in the first place. Parents were no help. They'd dismiss it as imagination, or seasonal weirdness, or kids being kids, until their own photos changed. One mother screamed when she found a birthday picture in a shoebox, her daughter turning 6, blowing out candles. Except in the photo, there were 6 kids. She remembered 5, had only ever invited 5, but there he was, a boy in the background, thin, pale, clapping too early. She asked her daughter about him. Her daughter looked confused, then frightened, then whispered, "He said you wouldn't remember." The photo disappeared a week later, literally gone. The entire shoebox had gone soft at the corners and peeled open like wet paper. Inside only confetti, and a note tucked in the bottom, scrawled in childish block letters, "You did forget, but we didn't." A theory formed among those brave, or foolish, enough to talk about it. The children were real, but not ours. They were prototypes, attempts, sketches made by the town during formation phases. Children almost born, or born but never carried forward. Versions that were drafted and deleted, but never fully erased. And now they were growing back, memory by memory, space by space, reclaiming seats in classrooms, names on roll calls, spaces in games of hide, and seek that ended with everyone being just a little too nervous to open that one closet door. Because sometimes, someone was already inside, and they weren't hiding. They were waiting to be found again. At Briar Ridge Middle School, a substitute teacher once had a class of 21 students listed, but when she counted heads, there were 22. She recounted. Still 22. She marked attendance, but one name didn't respond. And yet that desk was never empty. She didn't notice which one. Only that when she tried to leave the room during the fire drill, her steps kept pulling her back to that desk. Not her feet, her memory, pulling her back to check, to count again. The fire alarm stopped. No drill had been scheduled, and when she looked at the attendance sheet again, there was a new name at the bottom in handwriting that wasn't hers. Elliot Crane, present. She resigned that day, and never taught again. But every so often, in the parking lot of the school she never returned to, people report seeing her car parked. And in the front seat, her eyes staring at the building, mouthing numbers, counting, over and over. The town's database tried to delete the names, run audits, clean the system, but the more they erased, the more details appeared. The forgotten kids gained histories, middle names, field trip slips, yearbook quotes, and behind each name an address that didn't exist last year, but somehow now stood on the edge of town, mailbox crooked, curtains drawn. Sometimes people swore they saw lights inside, a birthday candle, a stack of homework on a table, a bowl of cereal slowly going soggy in milk. Not haunted, just paused, as if waiting for someone to pick the story back up. As if their scenes had been cut from the script, but never deleted from the set. The worst part isn't that the children are forgotten. It's that they remember you, your name, your secrets. That time you laughed at them before they faded. That time you said you'd call and didn't. That time you were supposed to hold their hand in the hallway, but let go because someone else was watching. They remember. And now, as Briar Ridge solidifies again, they are finding the cracks, slipping back through, appearing behind you in family photos, standing still in school portraits, eyes too aware, waiting in the background of dreams you only half remember. And if you find a small note one morning, tucked into your backpack, your coat pocket, your glove box, it might just say, "Do you remember me now?" If it does, don't answer. Don't say yes, because saying yes means you've opened the door. And once you let them back in, they stay. They take their seat again, in your house, in your life, in the back seat of your car as you drive home, heart pounding, wondering how long they've been there, smiling, just faintly, whispering, "Thank you for remembering. We've been so lonely." And then, they ask you to play. It didn't roll in like weather. It rose, from the drains, from the cracks in the sidewalk, from the seams between doors and floorboards. At first, it was only visible around 4 a.m., a gauzy shimmer hanging low along the streets, hugging the earth like it was listening for footsteps. It didn't smell of smoke or moisture, like you'd expect. It smelled like mornings you'd forgotten, like a jacket you used to wear when you were someone else. It was familiar, and that was what made it dangerous, because familiarity invites comfort. And comfort is the first step toward forgetting what isn't supposed to be here. People began reporting strange sensations before the fog even reached their neighborhoods. Hearing their names whispered behind closed windows. Dreaming of old friends they'd lost contact with. Friends who called them from inside the mist, asking why they'd stopped visiting. One woman described walking to her mailbox and suddenly remembering a second address. An apartment she'd never lived in, but could remember the layout perfectly. "It's like something is brushing against the underside of my memory," she said. Like it's knocking from the wrong side. She was found a week later, barefoot, standing in the middle of her lawn, smiling through fog so thick it wrapped around her like silk. When her husband called her name, She turned slowly and said, "I already answered you. Why are you calling again?" She never blinked once. The fog obeyed no forecast. It defied wind, ignored sunlight. Some mornings, it receded with the sunrise. Others, it hung in doorways until dusk. You'd see it reach toward window panes like a hand pressing lightly from the outside. At first, people thought it was a natural phenomenon, until cameras started acting up. Lenses fogged from the inside. Footage played backward. Voices on video repeated the same 3 seconds over and over again, lips moving but never quite syncing with the words. And the audio. Always the same phrase, low and clipped, return acknowledged. Identity confirmed. As if the fog wasn't asking who you were, it was reminding you. A postal worker named Glenn tried to drive through it one morning on Route 19. He described it later in his deposition. What little he could remember, as driving through someone else's thought. He said the fog didn't just block vision, it replaced it. He saw roads that didn't exist, signs and languages he didn't speak, a version of the town that looked older, dirtier, lonelier. Houses that seemed abandoned until he realized they weren't. He could see shapes moving inside, repeating motions like a stuck film reel. Over and over. He turned the vehicle around, but when he got back to the post office, everyone was gone. The clocks were blinking 1200. His truck was still full of mail, but every envelope was addressed to the same person. Him. Different versions. Glenn A. Parker. G. Anthony Park. Parker Glenn A. Seco the Mist. Each letter was sealed. Each one had the same return address, the fog. He quit the next day. His replacement lasted 3 days. The truck was later found parked in an alley, engine cold, with the fog lights still on. The town tried to cordon off affected areas, put up barricades, issue safety warnings. But the fog adjusted. It seeped under police tape. Avoided drones. And then came the worst development. It started following people home. Not just physically, but mentally. They'd speak of it when they weren't trying to. Draw it on napkins. Trace its curves in condensation on mirrors. And in every sketch, every verbal description, a subtle word kept emerging, self, as if the fog wasn't just a presence, it was a reflection. A version of you that never left Briar Ridge. A version that never stopped growing while you looked away, and now it was reaching back through the mist to reclaim what belonged to it. One child went missing in the fog. She'd been warned. Everyone had been. But she stepped into it one morning chasing her dog. The dog came back. She didn't. Except a week later, her voice was heard on the radio. Not calling for help, not crying, but reading something, a list of names, in alphabetical order. Her own name was last. Then she whispered, all returned. All remembered. One pending. The signal cut. The station had been offline for months. Some began theorizing the fog wasn't just reclaiming people. It was unifying timelines. Versions of lives that had split off, forgotten, rewritten, buried by choice or accident, were now folding back in, wrapping around the town like an inhaled breath. The fog didn't want to hurt you. It wanted you to know what you'd done, who you'd been, who you left behind in the other version of Briar Ridge, because you hadn't just lived one life. You'd lived several. And the fog was the tether, pulling you back to collect the ones you abandoned. Or worse, the ones you never knew existed. Eventually, townsfolk stopped leaving their homes when the mist rolled in. Some sealed their windows. Some wore masks. Others lit candles in old patterns. Repeating phrases they couldn't translate but swore helped keep the vapor from settling in their lungs. But others, those who had forgotten the most, opened their doors willingly. They walked into the fog with smiles, some crying, some laughing, some just humming the tune of a lullaby they didn't know they knew. None of them returned, but in their place came shadows, echoes, people, shaped outlines that stood at the end of driveways just past visibility, waiting, watching. And if you called out to them, they'd raise their heads, and in your own voice, they'd say, "You were supposed to stay." You'll know when it's found you, not just by the mist curling under your front door. But when you wake up in the middle of the night and find condensation forming letters on your window, spelling out your full name, and underneath, two simple words come back. You'll want to wipe it away. But don't, because once it dries, it'll be inside the glass, etched, permanent. A marker that your version of the story is ending, and the next version, the forgotten one, is taking over. With fog that knows every name you've ever answered to, and the sound of your own footsteps following just a little too closely behind. It starts with a key. One you don't remember owning. It's small, dull silver, stamped with a number that doesn't match anything in your home. You find it in places it shouldn't be. Your coat pocket, under your pillow, tucked inside a cereal box. The first time you hold it, it feels cold, but not from temperature. Cold from distance, as if it's traveled far, not across space, but through memory. You think nothing of it, until you begin noticing doors. Not new ones, old ones, familiar ones, but ones you haven't opened in years. Some aren't even in your house, and that's when the rooms start returning, one at a time. At first, they seem like tricks of the eye. A hallway that feels longer than it should, a closet that echoes when it never used to. Then you catch the scent of something that doesn't belong, dusty incense, old perfume, hot radiator air that hasn't run since your childhood. You open a door you know leads to the laundry room, and for a moment, the light slants differently, falling across a room you've never seen before, but somehow remember. Worn carpet, a rocking chair, a record player spinning without a record, and hanging on the wall, a photo of you with someone missing, a gap where a figure should be, cropped not by design, but by erasure. You blink. The room is gone. Was it ever there? You lock the door. You try to. But the key, that key, is already turning in your hand. Because this isn't about breaking in. It's about letting something back out. In Briar Ridge, people began whispering about the forgotten floor. Some claimed it was an attic that didn't exist. Others swore their basements went deeper than they used to. One man woke to find an unfamiliar door at the end of his hallway. When he opened it, he found his childhood bedroom, right down to the model airplane hanging from fishing line, the sheets printed with little stars. Except he hadn't lived in that house in over 30 years, and his childhood home had burned down. He walked inside. He never walked back out. His wife later found his shoes at the doorway. The door had vanished, but on the floor, a small silver key, stamped room 2. You think you know your house, your apartment, your space. But the truth is, we all leave spaces unused. Doors we close and forget. Corners we let fall into shadow. Drawers we never open again because of what they used to hold. And the rooms, they remember. They grow when we look away. Each locked room is a memory you buried. Each forgotten space is a version of you left behind. And now, those rooms are knocking from the inside. Not loud, not desperate, just patient, rhythmic, like a heartbeat you used to ignore. A girl named Elise told her mother there was a new room in the house. Her mother laughed, said it was a game. Then Elise started drawing blueprints, detailed ones, of rooms with no doors, of rooms that existed between walls. One drawing showed a spiral hallway that didn't end. Another showed her own bedroom, but mirrored. On the back of each drawing, Elise wrote, "Do not leave it unlocked." One night, the mother found her daughter standing at the foot of the stairs, key in hand. She asked what she was doing. Elise simply said, "They remembered I still lived here," and pointed to the hallway. There were now 4 doors. There had only ever been 3. Some tried sealing their homes, boarding up spaces, nailing doors shut, but the keys still turned. Some doors simply unlocked on their own, left slightly ajar. People spoke of cold drafts, of voices murmuring through the vents. Not malicious, not demanding, just conversational. Like an old roommate returning after years away. One man woke to find a room filled with every object he'd ever lost. Single socks, missing watches, His grandfather's lighter, a photograph of a friend who died in high school. On the back of the photo, written in looping handwriting he didn't recognize, "Thank you for letting me back in." He hasn't been seen since. But that room now appears in other people's homes. Same objects. Same photograph. Same open door. There's a reason we leave some rooms locked. Not because of what's inside, but because of what we left behind when we closed them. The grief we didn't finish. The apologies we never made. The versions of ourselves that needed a place to sleep when we moved on without them. Briar Ridge isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by unfinished selves. And now, those selves are reclaiming their square footage, resuming their tenancy. The town structures are remembering their previous tenants. And the keys, they're simply a formality, a courtesy. Because once the room remembers you, it lets itself in. If you wake to find a door open that you don't remember unlocking, don't go inside. Don't even look. Because the moment you recognize it, the room will grow stronger. It will reshape itself in your image. Fill with objects you've forgotten on purpose. And somewhere in the shadows, there will be a figure sitting. Not a stranger. Not exactly. But you. From before the loss. Before the lie. Before the decision that broke the timeline in two. And if you speak to it, it will not speak back. It will only stand, smile, and hold out the other key, the one that opens your room in its house. Because the exchange is always fair. You remember the room, and the room remembers where you're supposed to be. Inside, quiet, and finally home. You don't notice it at first, the absence. It's not loud, not jarring. It slips in sideways, quietly. Like a song you suddenly realize has ended, though you don't remember it fading. One moment, everything is as it should be, birds outside your window. The low hum of the refrigerator. The distant murmur of a television someone forgot to turn off. And then, nothing. Not a soft nothing, not a peaceful hush. A vacuum. A stillness so complete it presses against your eardrums, forcing you to swallow and blink just to break the illusion that time itself has paused. People in Briar Ridge began noticing it during conversations. One person would be speaking, then mid-sentence. Cut off, not by interruption, but by absence. Their mouth still moved, their face still emoted, but the sound never came. It wasn't muted. It was missing. Like the words were being said in a version of the room that had already moved on. The first reaction was confusion. Then fear. Then something worse, recognition. Because deep inside, everyone remembered hearing this kind of silence before. It affected machines next. Radios would play until precisely 3:03 p.m., then stutter into silence without shutting off. Microphones picked up movement, static, and breath, but no words. Voicemails arrived blank. Even music files, the ones stored locally, would appear to play, the bars moving, the volume up, but nothing would come out. When you pressed your ear to the speaker, you'd hear something else. Something beneath the silence. Not words. Not quite. A rhythm. Like breathing. Like something waiting for you to speak first. A sound engineer named Dana Locke tried to capture it. She used layered recorders, analog and digital, taping hours of ambient noise in the house she grew up in. She layered and filtered and looped, desperate to isolate the silence, to find its edges. What she discovered was horrifying. Under the silence was a conversation, but not hers. Two voices, low and deliberate, whispering things in an old version of her childhood bedroom. They spoke of her in the past tense, as if she were a memory they were trying to rebuild. She played the file for her assistant. He listened for less than a minute before walking out of the room. He was never seen again. When Dana returned to her equipment, all the files had vanished. In their place was a single new recording 28 seconds long. A child's voice saying, "We hear you now. Thank you." That was when the rules changed. Silence was no longer an absence. It was a presence. People began losing time during the quiet. Entire hours would pass in what felt like minutes. Conversations would resume with no memory of the gap. One woman recalled driving home and realizing she couldn't remember the last 5 miles. When she checked her dash cam, there was no video, only a blank, silent stretch with an occasional flicker of her own face appearing in the rearview mirror, even though she hadn't turned around once. Worse still, some began seeking the silence. As if it called to them, they'd turn off appliances, close windows, muffle sound, sit still, and wait. They didn't know what they were waiting for, only that it was coming, and that they wanted to be the first to hear it. The doctors had no name for it. They tried calling it sensory disruption, auditory dissociation, even delusional silence syndrome. None of it stuck, because those affected didn't just lose sound, they gained something else. Insight, memory, fractured visions of events that hadn't happened yet. One man, during a recorded interview, suddenly stopped mid-sentence. For 13 minutes, he sat completely still, staring past the camera. When the sound resumed, he finished the sentence with the exact same word he had paused on. Except now he described things he couldn't possibly know. People who hadn't died yet, buildings that hadn't been built, fires that would begin in the south quadrant of the town on October 3rd at 2:14 a.m., which they did, to the minute. After that, no one questioned him. He no longer spoke at all. He didn't need to, because when he opened his mouth, people felt the sound inside their own heads, and none of them remembered what he'd said, only that they had agreed. Then came the tones. Faint, pure, almost impossible to hear unless everything else was quiet. People described them as notes, single, unwavering frequencies that held steady for exactly 62 seconds, then vanished. Some said it came from the sky, others from the drains. A child claimed it came from her own chest. Wherever it came from, it always left behind the same thing, silence deeper than before. A silence so vast and weighted, it made your thoughts feel too loud, your heart beat too fast. One man took to sleeping with music playing at all times. Until one night, the music cut mid-track, not to silence, but to a voice singing in his own voice. The lyrics, "You weren't supposed to hear this yet." He destroyed the stereo. The silence remained. The town tried to counter it with noise. Sirens were tested daily. Loudspeakers played white noise in public squares. Churches rang bells every hour, on the hour. It didn't help. In fact, it only made the silence more aware of who hadn't accepted it yet. Those who resisted began hearing whispers during the quiet, murmurs of names, dates, instructions, a private frequency. One woman scribbled what she heard during a silence lasting 7 minutes and 42 seconds. The paper read, "You are the gap between the words. Fill yourself, then speak." She spoke only once after that, to a room full of people, in a voice that echoed far too long for the size of her lungs. And when she was done, the silence applauded. Not metaphorically. They all heard it, clapping, everywhere, from inside their closets, beneath their beds, behind their teeth. It said that the silence isn't spreading anymore, not because it stopped, but because it arrived. Briar Ridge is quieter now, not lifeless, not frozen, just attentive, as if the town itself is listening, waiting for the next word from you. And if you ever find yourself speaking only to hear your own voice, if the world ever feels too still, too soft, too close, listen harder. You may hear breathing that matches your own. You may hear your name whispered back from the inside. And when you do, don't respond, because the silence doesn't want an answer. It wants permission. And it already knows how to say your name in a way that makes you listen to yourself for the first time. It started on the unused channels. You know the ones? Those old numbered slots between the local stations, filled with nothing but snow, the kind of fuzzy static that used to mean the world hadn't caught up yet. The dead space, that's where they showed up first. The eyes, you'd flip past quickly, annoyed or bored, not even pausing long enough to let your brain register it. But later, lying in bed, brushing your teeth, Locking the door, you'd remember the shape. Two dark spots in the middle of the noise. Still. Too still. Not twitching like interference. Fixed. Like they were staring at you through a blizzard of forgotten signals. And they weren't just watching. They were waiting for you to notice. Briar Ridge had a community access station no one really paid attention to. Channel 13. It aired the usual boring fair town meetings. Religious broadcasts, grainy reruns of children's puppet shows no one admitted to remembering. Then, one night, a glitch. The feed cut out mid-broadcast during a cooking segment. A burst of static filled the screen. But instead of resuming, the image froze on a dim, gray shape. A hallway, empty, dusty. At the far end, something moved, barely. You couldn't see what, but it shifted, a blur among blur. Then came the sound, not music, not voices. Breathing. Ragged, wet, close. That broadcast lasted 3 minutes before cutting back to the station logo. No explanation. No apology. But people dreamed of the hallway that night. People who didn't even watch the channel. And in those dreams, they weren't alone. They never were. It escalated quickly after that. Television sets would flicker to life on their own, always tuned to empty channels, always at odd hours, 2:11 a.m., 4:44 a.m., 3:03 a.m. Sometimes the static would just play for minutes. Other times, there were images buried beneath it, flickering too fast to parse. But when slowed down, frame by frame, researchers discovered faces, dozens of them. Mouths open in silent screams, eyes too wide, some blurred like motion caught wrong, others sharp and staring straight into the lens. The worst part, they were all people from town. Most still alive, some recently missing. One woman swore she saw her father, who'd died 15 years earlier, mouthing a word she hadn't heard since childhood downstairs. She didn't have a basement. But that night, a trapdoor appeared in her hallway. She never opened it. She moved out the next day. The house sold in 3 hours. No listing, no sign, just gone. Tex tried to diagnose it. Claimed signal interference, radio cross, chatter, hoaxes. But even disconnected TVs turned on. One man kept his in a locked shed, unplugged entirely. It still glowed at night. He filmed it once. Grainy footage of static playing on a blank screen. Then the audio began to speak. Not a voice. Not words. Laughter. His own laughter. From a birthday party he didn't remember having. And over it, faint but clear, a second voice whispered, "He doesn't remember this part yet. He will." The man smashed the TV. But every mirror in his house reflected the same static. And behind it, 2 eyes. Watching. Waiting, smiling. Soon, it wasn't just TVs, phone screens. Security monitors. Video baby monitors. Anything with a display would occasionally flicker. Not always visibly, but enough to register as a presence. A delay when you waved your hand. A reflection that lagged a second too long. A glitch that looked too much like a face pressed against the glass. Some described hearing voices after the screen turned off, like the audio had been recorded and was just catching up. One woman called her sister via video chat. The call connected normally, except her sister wasn't in frame, just static. She called out. A voice answered, but it wasn't her sister. It was herself, saying, "I don't know if this is a call or a confession." Then the screen went black. She hasn't turned her phone on since. She won't say why. Only that she can still feel her own face blinking when she closes her eyes. But never in sync. The static began seeping into memories. People remembered shows that never aired. Episodes of series they knew by heart suddenly had scenes they'd never seen before. Scenes in which they appeared, blurry in the background, always watching themselves from a distance. Children remembered cartoons with characters that whispered secrets only they understood. One boy drew a character over and over again, a blank face, filled with fuzz, with eyes shaped like tuning dials. He called it Mr. Paws. When asked what it said to him, the boy replied, "He said I'm on the wrong channel." Eventually, the town stopped broadcasting altogether. The towers went down, the studios locked up, but the static remained. Because it was never in the transmission. It was in the receivers. In the act of watching itself. The more you tried to see through it, the more it stared back. People began covering their screens with cloth, avoiding mirrors, living in sound and light and noise. Because in the quiet, in the flicker, in the lull between frames, that's when it comes through. That's when it remembers your face. And if you ever hear a television turn on by itself, don't look. Don't try to find the remote. Don't wait for the image to resolve. Because if you see the hallway, it's already too late. The eyes have already found yours, and if the static sharpens just enough for you to recognize the shape behind it, if you see yourself watching you from a screen that should be dead, don't scream, because your voice will only echo back through the channel. And on the other side, 1,000 screens will light up, and 1,000 faces will turn toward yours. And in perfect, static, stitched unison, they'll say, "We've been watching. It's your turn now." It never enters through the front door. It doesn't need to. It arrives when you're too tired to notice, too distracted to care. Maybe after a long shift, or on a night when sleep creeps in just a little too fast. It starts in the reflection, just slightly off. Not a ghost, not a demon, not some classic creature that folklore warns about. It's simpler than that. More intimate, more cruel. Because what arrives in Briar Ridge doesn't haunt you. It replaces you, and no one notices the difference. Not at first, not even you. A man named Carson Dale was the first to report it. He'd gone to bed early, kissed his wife, locked up. The usual. Woke the next morning with everything where it should be. Except he felt like someone else. Not different, exactly. Just off center. Like a voice in his head was one syllable ahead of his own thoughts. He brushed it off until breakfast, when his wife asked him why he'd shaved. He hadn't. He walked to the mirror. Smooth face, no stubble. The razor was wet, the sink was clean, but he hadn't touched it. Hadn't even thought about it. And when he looked closer, the man in the mirror blinked a fraction too late. As if catching up, these weren't possessions. This wasn't madness. It was duplication. Shadows growing so exact, so familiar, that they could finish your sentences, walk your gait, mimic the way you scratched your chin when nervous. At first, they stayed in mirrors, then in recordings. Old home videos would play with one extra figure in the background. Family photos would develop with a second version of you, standing behind the original, just a few inches taller, or thinner, or smiling too much. One girl found her yearbook filled with 2 identical photos of herself. One where she wore her usual red sweater, and another where she wore black and looked slightly left of the camera. She didn't own a black sweater. She never smiled like that. When she flipped back to the index, her name was listed twice. Once in bold, once in faded ink, barely there. They started calling them Reflections Unbound, not because they were shadows, but because they were no longer confined to glass, to screens, to being only copies. One by one, they began stepping out, not with violence, but with permission. Because the more you ignored the feeling, the more you let it slide when your memories didn't quite match, when your voice sounded strange on a recording, when your friends said, "You seem different lately," the easier it became for them to take one more step forward, and one more of you disappeared, replaced, merged, swapped out like a burned-out light bulb. But this time, the new light flickered a little too steadily. People began disappearing in plain sight. Their bodies didn't vanish. Their habits didn't change. But those closest to them knew something was wrong. One husband swore his wife had been replaced, even though she looked and sounded exactly the same. He said she laughed too quickly, held her fork in the wrong hand, and didn't flinch at thunder like she used to. He told his friends. They said he was paranoid. He called his wife out at dinner. She smiled, calm, steady, and said, "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. I just fit better." He ran out of the house. He was found the next morning, face down in the lake. drowned, but not waterlogged, not bloated. His body looked posed, and his face was almost smiling. There were rules, some said. You could delay the process, avoid mirrors, never speak your full name after dark. Keep old photographs face down, never leave a room without closing the door behind you, even for a second. But the truth was, once they noticed you, once your copy had grown strong enough, it was inevitable, because the shadow never forced its way in. It simply waited for you to forget what made you real. A missed step in your morning routine, a thought you dismissed too easily, a memory you no longer questioned, and when that happened, you stopped being the original. You started sharing space. Some say you can tell them apart by the eyes. Too clear, too steady, always holding eye contact just a second longer than normal. Not in challenge, not in affection, in confirmation. They look at you like a list they're checking off, like you're the next one to be replaced. And once the list is complete, once every original is gone, then what? What happens to a town made entirely of perfect copies? What happens to a place where no one ever makes mistakes, forgets birthdays, or trips over their own tongue? Is it better? Is it peace? Or is it just silence in a skin suit? A town of people wearing human masks over unquestioning repetition. A life lived without uncertainty, without soul. If you find an old video of yourself and something about it feels wrong, if your voice sounds too clean, your smile too practiced, don't watch it twice. If someone you love seems just a little too consistent, too sharp, too present, ask them a question they'd never expect. Something raw, something messy, something only the real you would remember. If they smile and answer too quickly, it's already over, because they don't learn by guessing. They learn by watching you forget who you are. And the moment you doubt yourself, the moment you let your reflection blink before you do, that's when the shadow steps forward, 1 foot into your life, 1 breath ahead of yours, and it whispers, with love, with relief finally, you made room. Then it turns to your loved ones, and smiles. No one built it. There are no blueprints, no records, no foundation permits filed at City Hall. One day it simply wasn't there, and the next, it was. Perfectly centered at the end of Ash Lane, where the road once curved off into forest. A house that didn't look new, didn't look old, just timeless. Wrapped in peeling white paint, shuttered windows, a crooked weather vane spinning in wind no one felt. The mail carrier swore it hadn't been there on his morning road, but by sunset, there it stood, watching. And the real problem wasn't that the house appeared out of nowhere. It was that everyone remembered it always being there. Except for you. They called it the last house, like it had always been part of the town, like it had roots deep under the pavement. Neighbors recalled barbecues there, birthdays, even funerals. They talked about the strange old woman who used to live inside. Miss Adelphi, they said with crooked smiles. Some described her as stern and kind, others as completely blind. One man claimed she'd taught him how to ride a bike. Another said she used to make bread that could predict the weather. But every photo anyone found of the house showed it dark, windowless, lifeless. No curtains, no lights. No sign of anyone ever having stood behind the glass. When asked why they remembered things that couldn't have happened, they'd pause a frown and then nod, as if reading a page they'd already memorized, but had never quite understood. You were the only one who couldn't recall the house, which meant the house was meant for you. It began calling subtly, a dog barking only when it faced that end of the street, streetlights flickering when you walked past, a coldness, specifically around the house, that clung to your sleeves like damp breath. Then came the dreams, you, standing on its porch, the door already open, a warm yellow light inside, and just beyond the threshold, the sound of your mother's voice calling your name. Not the voice she used when she was angry, or sick, or tired. The one she used when you were 5 and scared, and couldn't sleep without the hallway light on. She'd say, "Come in, baby. It's all right now. It's time to come home." You'd wake up with your feet dirty, splinters in your hands, soil under your nails. The house was remembering you, calling you back. They said no one ever really left the house once they entered. "Oh, they come back out," someone once said, sitting outside the cafe with a mug that never seemed to cool. But they aren't quite the same. You'd see them around town. The ones who went inside. They'd walk slower, blinking less, like they were listening to something distant. Always smiling too much. Always polite. Always saying things like, "It all makes sense now," or "We were only ever meant to come home." One woman returned and began baking endless pies. She left them on random porches with notes that read, "For the part of you lost. Don't eat too fast." No one ever finished those pies. No one could. Each bite tasted like a memory you didn't want to confront, a door you shouldn't have closed, a word you wish you'd never said. Eventually, you couldn't resist anymore. The house became a pull, like gravity, like drowning in warm sheets on a cold morning. You stepped onto ash lane. The sky turned the color of ash. Time slowed, sound faded, and the house opened its door before you even knocked. Inside, it smelled like every room you've ever missed. Carpet from your childhood bedroom. Pine from your grandfather's den. Vanilla from a kitchen you don't remember, but know you belonged in once. The layout changed as you walked. Rooms folded around you. Some too big. Some so small you could barely breathe. Each one whispered a question you weren't ready to answer. Do you remember who you used to be? Do you want to know what would have happened if you stayed? Do you want to see the version of yourself that never left this town? You did. You didn't. You couldn't look away. At the center of the house was a room without windows, filled with mirrors. Not just reflections, versions. Each mirror showing a different you, laughing at a table full of faces you'd never met, crying in a field under a sky with 2 moons, screaming into a telephone in a language you didn't speak, hugging someone who wore your skin but not your eyes. One mirror stood empty. You reached toward it. It rippled. It reached back. And then, the house let go. You stumbled out at sunrise. No memory of what you saw. But your hands were warm. Your pockets full of dust. And your name, your real name, was gone from your mind's tongue. You tried to say it aloud. It came out wrong. Like a song you used to know the words to, but forgot after you stopped humming it for too long. People treated you differently after that, kind but cautious, like someone waking a sleepwalker. They'd ask you doing okay? You'd smile. Say yeah. But deep down you'd feel empty and overflowing all at once, full of someone else's memories, haunted by a piece you didn't earn. And at night, sometimes you'd walk to the mirror and swear it was breathing with you. A heartbeat in sync. A shadow that didn't wait for you to move. You weren't you anymore. Not completely. You'd left the version of yourself that questioned things back inside that house. And the one that returned. That one knew better than to ask what the house really was. It didn't haunt you, it housed you. Even now. Even still. Even after the house at the end of Ash Lane vanished again. Leaving behind only a crooked weather vane and a smear of footsteps leading into dirt that never turned back. And in your dreams, when you walk through doors that no longer exist, you hear one last whisper from behind the walls, "Welcome home. We kept your place warm.